My name is Alyssa Ambacher, and I'm the chair of the Site Remediation and Waste Management Program Training Committee, and I'm here with Nicole Kalajian today, who's also on the training committee, and we would like to welcome you to the Soulwrap guidance training. All right, so if you are here for CECs today, if you are here in person, you need to not miss more than 45 minutes of the training, and you should sign in and out, and that's on that sign out sheet in the other room there. And if you're here virtually, which many of you are, make sure you're logged in for the entire session and answer 3 out of 4 of the poll questions that are randomly inserted in the presentation. And just remember those, you don't have to get them right necessarily, it's just for attendance purposes. Oops. The board has approved 2.5 credits for this course. So after the presentation, we will email a list of eligible participants to the LSRPA. They will email you a link, and then you'll pay a $25 processing fee so you can get your certificate. This is just an example of a webinar question that the virtual attendees will have to answer for credit. So just a little fun one. The first day of summer is in June, true or false? The answer is true. It's almost summer. And now I'm going to pass it over to Nicole.
Thanks, Alyssa. She mentioned my name is Nicole Kalajian. I'm with the Bureau of Environmental Evaluation and Risk Assessment. And so I'm just going to finish out the sort of intro slides here, and then we'll get going. A couple of important reminders: in-person attendees, if you can, please mute your cell phones. And if you do have to take a call, if you wouldn't mind just stepping out to do so, it would certainly be appreciated. Also, webinar attendees, some of you folks have access to sort of the back end of GoToWebinar, so if you could please mute your microphones and keep your camera off, it's also appreciated. We will be having some question and answer segments throughout today's presentation, so if you do have a question during the presentation, just hold it, and then we will have a few of the training committee members come around with microphones and have the questions asked. I know that there's only 25 or so of us in this room. However, the folks on the webinar can't hear us. So we need to make sure that we talk into the microphone so they're also getting those valuable questions on their end as well. For folks on the webinar, there is a question box that you can put your questions into, and then the moderators here in person will read them out loud for those speakers. And we do have kind of a tight schedule today, so we'll be taking questions as time permits. So if you do have a question that was not asked, just be sure to keep, ask those questions, and then it will be addressed via email. If you are in need to use the chat function, just use that only for talking to the folks here from the department that are dealing with the technical issues of the presentation. Other than that, just limit your questions to technical questions only in the chat, and then the questions go to the questions terminal. And again, please remember to sign in and out if you are here in person in order to receive your credits. And then also the course evaluation can be found at the website you see here, and we'll be putting it up and throughout the presentation today. You can access it in the chat function there. And on that note, I would like to introduce our first speaker this morning, Mr. Mike Poland. He is from the LSRPA. So good morning, Mike.
Thank you, Nicole. Good to see many smiling faces for the first time in quite a while. So again, I am Mike Poland, representing the LSRP Association. We have a busy summer full of events. Just like to give you a preview of what's going on this summer. As always, we love our sponsors. We have our diamond sponsors. Certainly couldn't do a lot of our events, so many events, without our sponsors. So thank you to our diamond, gold partners, and silver partners. Upcoming courses and events. So our marquee event is coming up next week, June 14th or 15th, Tuesday and Wednesday. So we have a 2-day event, Site Remediation Conference, many opportunities for networking, seeing your colleagues for the first time in person, continuing education events. I think we have about over 20 credits available, including ethics for those of you who still need ethics for your renewal. A lot going on, DEP panel, presentations, poster presentations, things like that. So check out lsrpa.org for our conference schedule. And a lot of continuing education events. So we have our monthly virtual member regulatory roundtable that's coming up on July 26th. Hot topic is amendments to the A901 rule. Bill Silverstein and Charlene Drake will be speaking on A901. And we also have an Aspiring Professional Series event. That's going to be surface geophysics, GPR, soft dig. So the real practical stuff for the aspiring professionals to network, get involved. And that's given by the folks from ERM and Subsurface Environmental Technologies. Again, sign up on our website. Another event, July 14th, we have our annual Trenton Thunder game. Night game, 7 p.m. A lot, again, networking, have a drink with your colleagues, go see everybody and watch the baseball game. Great event. Another event for the end of the summer, save your date for the Battle at the Beach Cornhole Tournament. So Tuesday, August 16th, we're going to be at Point Pleasant Beach. Successful event last year for those of you who attended, had a great time. Again, come out, have a drink, play some cornhole, and network with your colleagues. And again, check out our socials. Get involved. If you're looking for an opportunity for involvement in the LSRPA, come reach out to any of us, send an email. We'll be happy to have you get on board. Oh, thank you.
All right, thank you, Mike. I just wanted to make a clarification. I'm getting some questions from webinar participants. If you're here virtually on the webinar, you do not have to sign in. We have record that you're here just because you're signed in virtually. And if you are here in person at the DEP, then you would please sign in and out on the sign-in sheet. So I just wanted to clarify that. So up next, I want to introduce Mike Gaudio. He's the chair of the committee that updated the guidance document, and he's going to start the presentation today.
Thanks, Alyssa. For you, everybody that doesn't know me, I'm Mike Gaudio, supervisor with the Bureau of Remedial Action Permitting. I'm also the chairperson of the Stakeholder Committee. And today I'm going to give you a little background on the Soulwrap guidance document and a little introduction here. Okay, so the WRAP Stakeholder Committee was formed back in 2018. We basically meet twice a month since then, so we work pretty often together, and we've gotten to know each other very well, and we got a good committee. So our purpose is to identify ways to make the WRAP process more transparent, efficient, and effective. A big part of that goal is revising our forms and guidance documents and making recommended rule changes as appropriate. Some of our biggest accomplishments to date, we created all new WRAP application forms and applications. We updated, we did that in May 2019, as you could see. We also updated the groundwater and soil remedial action by-cert forms in May 2021. But our biggest accomplishment to date is completing the Soulwrap guidance document, which we began back in September 2019. So it's been a while, and it took a while to get there. There was a lot of DAG review on this, given the legal documents involved here. So, but we finally got it done, so we're happy to present it here. So here's a list of the WRAP Stakeholder Committee members. Just want to thank everybody, all the committee members, for all their hard work in getting this done. I want to thank all the people at the DEP and the DAG that gave comments on the document and the feedback, and thank the training committee for getting this together so quickly. They did a great job with that. Okay, so you see here's a little background on the Soulwrap guidance document. As you can see, it hasn't been revised since February 2010, so that's 12 years, and we know a lot has changed in 12 years. We updated it to clearly indicate when a Soulwrap application is to be submitted and by whom. Also, it's there to assist the user in navigating the various steps in the Soulwrap process. You know, we know the wrap process in general could be, you know, confusing at times. There's a lot of steps, especially for the Soulwrap process, given the D-notice termination step that's involved. One of the things we made sure to do when we were updating the Soulwrap guidance document is to make sure we targeted common administrative and technical deficiencies that we have with the Soulwrap applications. So that should make the guidance document very useful for everybody, and hopefully we'll have less deficient applications going forward. The format now conforms with the other DEP guidance documents, and there's a lot of new sections, appendices, and we you know, expanded and updated some of the existing ones. So here's some highlights of the Soulwrap guidance document. This is the table of contents from the Soulwrap guidance document. All the highlighted sections are all new sections. Anything that's not highlighted was existing and just updated and expanded. So you can see there's some really good sections here. You know, we have an engineering controls cap section. We have tips on preparing a D notice. We also have the wrap contact information change section and the infamous D notice termination section where that process wasn't really well documented. So now we have it, you know, the steps involved there, as well as the notice in lieu of D notice, which was the biggest addition to this that took the longest to get it going. So some more highlights here. These are all new appendices. You can see here there's a procedure for terminating a D notice, so there's tips and steps there for when you're doing that process. There's also the model notice in lieu of D notice example. We always get questions, hey, do you have an example of what one looks like? So we made sure we gave you one here in Appendix 2. And then Appendix 4 and 5 are the resolution and written agreement concerning notice in lieu of D notice examples. And Raina will be talking about that later on in her presentation. So, and I just want to say thank you, and hopefully everybody enjoys the training and have fun.
All right, thank you very much, Mike. Next, we have a discussion on pre-permit delineation with Ms. Kathy Stetzer.
Hi, I'm Kathy Stetzer. I'm an LSRP and a geologist with GEI Consultants, and I also sit on the state licensing board. It's important for me to say that the opinions I'm expressing today are my own, and I'm not here representing the board. So pre-permit delineation. I have too many things here. What does that mean? That's not a thing. We don't call things that. It means a couple of things, and we kind of lumped it together with this title because before you turn in your permit, you have to have delineation, and you need to have done some remediation generally. But it could be done during the RI. It could be done while you're working on your work plan. It could be done at the RA phase. By the time you get to the permit, you should have point of compliance sampling showing compliance with the remediation standards. And there are limited exceptions that Karen and I think Mark Fisher will be talking about later. But generally, that's what the permit reviewers are expecting to see. So just some basics for remedial investigations. Remember, you have to do public notice. It doesn't have anything to do with your permit, but it's always a good time to remind LSRPs that public notice is required 14 days prior to implementation of the RI. That could be your sign or your letters. Evaluate and delineate all media as required in the tech regs. This is not 1986. This is not, I'm just gonna look at soil in my first phase and then groundwater in my second phase, and maybe someday I'll get around to sediment and surface water and soil gas and indoor air. All media during the RI must be evaluated as required and delineated. A receptor evaluation is required for the RI and the RA phases. So you would have done, if you did a PASI, you would have done one then. You would have updated it with your RI. You may have done a work plan, not required for the work plan, can't hurt if you think it's useful, and then required at the RA phase. Delineation in the unsaturated and the saturated zone is required for dermal, inhalation, for your direct contact standards. That goes all the way till you find clean. I think the DEP calls it center of the earth theory or something. But remember, migration to groundwater delineation, I did not do that, is also required. Now we have migration to groundwater standards. You can't ignore them. They have to be addressed. This seems like a new concept to some people, and for people that are getting close to being done, remember, if you still have unsaturated migration to groundwater exceedances and your groundwater's still dirty and doesn't look like it's getting any cleaner, you probably need something, some sort of remedial action. Again, folks are going to be talking about that later on, but it's super important that you remember in the unsaturated zone, migration to groundwater delineation and remediation is required if it's impacting groundwater. Also keep in mind, just because you don't have to delineate below the water table doesn't mean that you shouldn't. A lot of times, certain compounds will adhere to rock matrix, they'll adhere to the soil, and you're going to keep getting matrix diffusion. You clean up the groundwater a little bit, and then, oh, it's dirty again. If you can't figure out why, it's probably because you've absorbed some of the constituents to your rock or your soil, and unless you start looking below the water table, it's never going to get clean. So not required, but might be something you want to think about. Delineation of all free and residual product. It's something that we don't often think about when we're talking about soil, but you can get that greasy ring in your dirt when you had floating product. You also could have residual product just in unsaturated soil. That's included in the RI. So this was the gift that keeps on giving. We got the policy state in 2014, and it allows us to extrapolate, which I'll get to in a minute. But let's go back. That's the title of it, which I never knew, which is why I could never find it on the DEP website, because I didn't know what it was called. It's called this really long thing, and it's found under the administrative guidance on the guidance page. And the latest version is January 2020. And I believe the most recent update included some reference to free and residual product. Yes, I think DEP's nodding at me, yes. So what that policy statement essentially says is you need to identify the nature and extent, both on and off site, understand receptors and their potential impacts. That means doing your ecological evaluation as far along as you need to, even, all the way to the risk assessment if necessary. All of that's covered in the ecological evaluation guidance. A note to LSRPs, if you are not an ecological expert, you are obligated to find someone to work with you who is. You should not be doing risk assessments if you don't know what you're doing and if you're not qualified. We don't have to do this alone. And when you start getting into the ecological evaluations, there's a lot of factors that geologists and engineers aren't typically trained to do. So make sure you're finding qualified help either within your firm or outside of your firm to make sure that you're getting that ecological evaluation done correctly. And then you need to determine if remedial action is required. You've done your delineation and you're figuring out, do I have enough data to make a determination on remedial alternatives? Sometimes that's done at the RI. Sometimes you've delineated it, but you need to collect some more samples for your remedial alternatives. That might be done between the RI and submission of the work plan. But clearly you need to have that data to submit a remedial action work plan or design a remedy. So we're allowed to extrapolate. That's what this policy statement allowed us to do in 2014 when we were all freaking out about getting those old site RIs done. And then we got our 2-year extension, and then we actually managed to get done most of them. Policy statement, there's the link. We talked about it a minute ago. Remember that you cannot extrapolate for sediment and surface water. You still need point of compliance delineation for surface water and sediment. But you can use professional judgment on soil and on groundwater if you have the technical lines of evidence. It can't be a feeling. It can't be because your client wanted you to. You actually need to have sufficient data to show the nature and extent. That might be gradient. You know, you can definitely see you're getting decreasing gradient with depth. You know you have solvents, they could be sinkers, but you've got enough vertical profiling to show that you're almost to the standard, but not quite. Okay, that's a place where you might be able to extrapolate. Same with, I know we're talking about soil. Whoops, that was a good example though. So with soil, you've got a compressor that leaked all over the place and it's really high rate by the compressor and you show a gradient. You might be able to extrapolate that. We're allowed to do that, but you can't just have one data point and then extrapolate because that does not a gradient make. You want to make sure that you understand receptors and if they've been impacted, and you need to be able to have enough information to select the appropriate remedial action. If you're using your technical judgment, professional judgment for extrapolation, make sure you have those three components clearly explained in whatever key phase document you're turning in. Showing your work is incredibly important. You're going to hear it over and over from every single speaker that comes up here today. All right, here's the part that gets tricky. If you did your RI 5 years ago, you may have forgotten you extrapolated. You may think you have point of compliance sampling. I call this the wishing makes it so. Like you loved it so much you thought you were actually done. Make sure you remember you're not done before you get all the way to the end and you know your staff geologist is like, you're not done. So remember you extrapolated. Remember you need point of compliance sampling in the RA phase. If it's not and it lands, so you're submitting your remedial action permit application, you're submitting your RAR, permit reviewer gets the information and they see that there's not point of compliance sampling, or it looks like there might not be. They'll find your permit deficient. They will find it incomplete. They're the nice words that the DEP uses with us. They give us the opportunity to show them that we actually have it. Maybe we weren't clear enough. Maybe we have data. Maybe we just didn't explain it. If you can't do any of those things, they're going to reject it. They don't say reject, but it's what happens. If you can't show them the stuff, then your permit is no good. You're going to have to take it back. You may have missed your time frame. Now everybody's mad. Just make sure you have those point of compliance samples and that you're clearly describing them. If you're varying from the rule, which LSRPs are allowed to do, make sure you're checking the box on the form saying, I took a variance. Make sure you have a section in your report or in an appendix that says, here's where I explain why my variance is protective. They need to be, if you check that box, you have a variance, they need to go find why you did it, and you should be very, very clear. Don't be afraid to put too much information. You want to be absolutely sure the DEP knows where to look and what you've done. The anecdote, we had a matter before the board where an LSRP was turned into the board for not writing a variance. All their work was great. The science was fine. What they did was protective, but it required a variance. So the board had no choice but to find them in violation because they didn't write their variance, even though everything was there. So make sure you're checking the box and you're writing it all out. Take a quick minute to talk about historic fill, and Karen Barnes is going to give an example later. But too often, permit reviewers are looking at a site where they're like, it's historic fill everywhere. I'm just going to do a site-wide deed notice and a virtual CEA. Except when they start looking at the data, there's clearly some like hot spot areas. It's not a consistent gradient. And then they look a little further and, well, maybe you had a boiler blowdown, or maybe you had a compressor and the PAHs are higher near those AOCs. You got to pass a straight face test with your gradient when you're turning in a historic fill. Those would be AOCs. You may be addressing them exactly the same with a cap and a deed notice. And PAHs aren't mobile, so they're probably not a problem in groundwater. but you have to call AOCs AOCs and not pretend like it's all historic fill. If your gradient isn't passing the straight face test, make sure you're either explaining it further or calling them AOCs. So your work, very, very important. Okay, some other considerations. If you're usually offsite source is groundwater, is where we see it most of the time, but there could be drums on a fence line that have leaked across the fence line and you've got offsite source soil. You still need to do a preliminary assessment. You need to call the hotline. Soil sampling may be required. You would follow the same types of procedures that we all generally know how to do for groundwater, but for soil. This isn't a PA light. That's not a thing. This is not a constituent-specific PA, also not a thing. It's a regular PA, so it's following the PA guidance and confirming that you either never used that constituent or that you used it and you know where and you didn't leak any. Again, delineate free and residual product. Okay, this next one, I was telling the DEP, I got like 4 calls in the last month about this very thing, where they were getting questions about their permit applications because they hadn't delineated to the residential standard. Section 4.2 in the tech regs talks about how if you're doing an on-site restricted use remedy, you don't need to delineate to the residential standard. There's a paragraph that says that. And everybody stops there, and then they write their report and they turn it in. You got to read the whole section. If you read the whole section of 4.2, it clearly says by the time you get to your property boundary, you need to know if you've met the residential standard. And if you haven't, you need to go off-site, meet the residential standard, and then remediate those off-site parts also. So total urban legend, I'm going to add it to my urban legend slides for people who know I have them, that you don't have to delineate to the residential standard if you're doing an on-site restricted use remedy. Read the whole thing, 4.2. We talked about migration to groundwater exceedances, and others will be talking about it. Order of magnitude protectiveness evaluation. So if you have final remediation documents already for some AOCs on your site, there's a couple things you want to do. First, you want to confirm they're actually NFAs and not comment letters. A lot of people think they have NFAs, and they end up in the end not actually having NFAs. So if you have an NFA or you have an RAO for an AOC, you're going to compare it the order of magnitude analysis. If you don't, it's a direct standard comparison. Also, the protectiveness evaluation is an important piece of this. It's not just comparing it to the data that you have collected, but were the correct data collected in the first place? It's not protective if they sampled for the wrong thing or didn't sample at the right depth or didn't sample at all. My favorite example is, back in the 80s, you had a vapor degreaser, you sampled it for TPH and got an NFA. But is an NFA in 2022 for a vapor degreaser that only was sampled for TPH protective? I would argue no. You would need to go sample for volatiles to see if there were solvents. So order of magnitude or direct standard comparison and a protectiveness evaluation is needed. Emerging contaminants, topic we all love to hate. Remember, there's questions on the form about emerging contaminants, and these are what they are. So when you get to your RI or your work plan or your RA, you're going to be asked these questions and you need to have a legitimate answer. And you need to back it up in your document. So if you're saying, is not a contaminant a concern at the site, but you have 111 TCA in your groundwater, that's a tough sell. Why didn't you look for 1,4-dioxane? If you had a fire training area out back, and they sprayed fire foam all over the place, but you're saying, PFAS isn't something I need to look for. You really need to look at the DEP has guidance, FAQs. ITRC has a great document that gives like the history of PFAS use and what types of operations in industrial sectors it was used in. Make sure you're looking at that and make sure you're backing up whatever selection you make in your document. People will look. Show your work, clearly document professional judgment, technical lines of evidence, as many as you have, put them in there. Sometimes I'll bullet them out in my text, and then I'll make an appendix that goes into lots of detail, because clients don't always like all that gobbledygook science clogging up their text. Stick it in an appendix. Whoever wants to read all the detail can go do it there. Don't skimp on carrying the detail. And I think this is something the DEP runs into, and it's a frustration with them, and it's easy enough for us to fix it. In your RI, you gave all the information, and then you got to your RA, and maybe you said, oh, it was all in my RI. Well, that's unhelpful because they don't have the RI in front of them. It's not their job to go digging through all the old documents. We don't have case managers anymore. The more you can give them in as concise a fashion as possible, the less painful your RAP application review is going to be for the DEP and for you. Keep carrying that information over from report to report if it's important. Section K is your friend in the RAP application. You're going to hear a lot about Section K from the other speakers. It's the place where you can show stuff. You can add attachments. If you did something that's a little unusual, make sure you're really explaining it. Explain your delineation. Explain why you're done. Just keep carrying it over. It will save everyone a lot of headache. The more information you provide to the DEP in as clear a fashion as possible, the faster your application is going to get reviewed and hopefully approved. If the DEP contacts you, get back to them right away. Don't hide under your desk. Don't freak out and walk away. Just get back to them. Find out what they want. Be professional. You don't have to agree with the DEP, but it's important that we all are professional with one another. If you're still not happy with the answers you're getting from your reviewer, ask for a meeting with a supervisor. Ask for a technical consult, but remain professional. It goes a long way. It really does. I know it's frustrating, and I know sometimes you feel like you're being challenged, and nobody likes that. But the way to get through this and solve our clients' problems and get closure for our client is to try to remain professional and be nice if you can. All right, we got to test your knowledge.
Yep, we have our first Test Your Knowledge quiz. So if you are here virtually, this is for you to get attendance. The question is, point of compliance sampling is required with the RI report. A, yes, B, no, or C, it depends. We'll have this up for about a minute. In the meantime, if you are here in person, on the other side of your agenda is a QR code, and you can access the SurveyMonkey for our course evaluation for today. We really appreciate you taking the time to fill those surveys out. It helps us come up with additional trainings and keep improving. And if you are attending virtually, the SurveyMonkey link was put in the chat box, so you can easily access it and click on it there. Let me see.
Has it been a minute? Are we good?
I think it's been about a minute. Let's see where we're at. All right, yeah, it's about to close.
All right, so the answer is, it depends. Because yes, you can extrapolate for soil and groundwater, but you cannot extrapolate, and you need point of compliance sampling for sediment and surface water. And my last slide is called, there's a guidance document for that. You are not in this alone in so many ways. You've got your colleagues to help you, you've got professionals to help you, you can call the DEP, but you can also look for these very excellent guidance documents that will help you make sure that your reports are as complete as possible and your work is done in accordance with the regulations. The very first one, our Soulwrap guidance, yes. Section 16 has a useful guidance document list, and then we also came up with this list of ones that we thought were particularly important for completing your RI, your RA, and turning in a complete RAP application. And I am done.
All right, thank you so much, Kathy. Up next, we have Mike Infanger and Mike Gaudio to talk about the RAP process and the forms.
Okay, hey again, everybody. Mike Infanger, soil supervisor, and I are going to give a quick presentation on the Soulwrap applications and forms and the process. So here's our presentation. Up here is a list of the Soulwrap forms. Hopefully everybody's seen these by now. They've been out there for a while. You know, there's the famous termination, the D-notice form is up there. I mean, any technical, you know, changes to the, you know, your engineering control, institutional control should be, you should be using that form before you send in a mod or a termination application. The two forms on the bottom, the RAP contact information change form and the RAP transfer change of property ownership application, they're on the bottom because they do apply to both soil and groundwater. As part of the updates to the Soulwrap guidance document, we had to make some updates to the forms and applications. So I'm going to highlight some of those significant changes here, the next couple of slides. So you can see here with the big red arrow basically pointing to the checkbox. That checkbox used to say primary responsibility for permit compliance. Now it's, the new term is primary contact for permit compliance, and the reason for that is all permittees are responsible for permit compliance. Just the person that's checked off in this box, the department will contact them first for any issues or initially with it. We no longer put this on the Soulwrap itself. We just make a note in our computer system. We also added a new question on the Soulwrap initial application for the migration to groundwater pathway, exposure pathway. You know, it's here to document how it was addressed. It also has a, you know, put the location in the RAR and how you address the issue. This is an important question for us to have on there because a lot of times people were not addressing the migration to groundwater exposure pathway or not adequately addressing it. So Bill Karp will go into detail on this later. The soil contaminant data table that's on the Soulwrap initial and modification applications. We had to update that to the new soil remediation standards. So you can see we added a bunch of new columns there to make sure all the exposure pathways were captured. And we also, because there were so many rows, we had to go landscape style on it. So, and then an important note is, you know, where you see the highest concentration for the contaminant, that should be the highest concentration remaining. So we made sure that the instructions kind of bolded that a little bit. Also, there's a little checkbox there, you know, there's a little note there on the bottom, basically where, you know, check that box if the number entered wasn't the highest contaminant concentration. That's basically if you did compliance averaging to meet the non-residential remediation standard. And we got a GQ on that, so we made sure we updated the forms to be more clear on that. And then we also added in the instructions of the Soulwrap applications and forms. We get a lot of, you know, questions on permittee documentation, so we made sure we took the stuff that was in the actual Soulwrap guidance document, also put in the instructions, so people don't have to, you know, flip around trying to get that information. So for example, if the PRCR cannot be found, you know, make sure you document the attempts to try to locate them. It could be internet searches, phone logs, business databases. Also, if you can't find the PRCR, make sure you provide again the documentation. You know, if they no longer exist, make sure you provide the documentation to show that, whether it be bankruptcy court filings or business database printouts. And if it is documented that they no longer exist, then the department will not put them on as a PRCR on the Soulwrap. We also understand there's situations where the signature for the PRCR or the owner can't be obtained. You know, make sure you provide them with a completed permit application, and, you know, document the attempts that you provided to them, you know, through certified mail. And again, we put a note in there on the step that's, you know, in the certification sections of the steps that you need to do to document that. A lot of times in section D's and E of the Soulwrap applications, we get care of information. We do not want care of information. We want the contact information for the PRCR and the property owner themselves. So don't put care of in there. Don't, unless it's a special circumstance. It should be the contact information for the PRC arm and the property owner. And then the last item here is make sure you verify who the property owner is of the site by checking the tax database. That's what the department uses. We understand that sometimes the tax database may not always be up to date. So if it is different, make sure you use Section K, other information, to document why it is different. Again, it'd be one less, deficiency with your permit application. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mike Infanger.
Hi, I'm Mike Infanger. I'm the supervisor of the unit that does most of the soil permits, and I'd like to go over some of the common problems encountered when completing soil permit applications. Okay, we've already talked about variances from the rules and also deviations from the guidance documents. Oftentimes we see that the rules have been varied from, or the guidance documents have been deviated from, and there is no explanation in the application or the RAR. So yeah, we want multiple lines of evidence if you're going to vary from the rules or deviate from the guidance. Again, if more explanation, discussion is needed, then please use Section K. And we've already talked about, yes, this is the way we usually see Section K, but no more than 90% of the time. There's nothing here, I like to make the analogy, pretend the application is a used car and Section K is your sales pitch. If there's something that looks funny on the application, explain it there. Example might be, suppose you mark residential for your site use and presumptive remedy, you say, not applicable. Well, doesn't that look funny? This would be the place to put. Hey, it's been residential since before the 2010 regulations. So the permit writer doesn't write you a notice of technical deficiency. Again, one of the common problems, the problems are roughly 50% technical, 50% administrative. About half the time, the technical problem is not delineating horizontally and vertically. Sometimes vertical delineation isn't practical, but remember that's a variance every time from the tech regs. It should be documented. And again, modeling is not acceptable at the remedial action stage. At that point, you need point of compliance delineation with analytical samples. And if you don't have that, it's a variance. And it's just kind of a no-brainer. Knowing the complete extent of the soil contamination is key in evaluating receptors and knowing your contaminant mass. And again, the modeling, the DEP model policy statement is on the website at this link. Okay, soil RAP applications and CEA are well restriction area fact sheet forms for historic fill should only have typical historic fill compounds, metals, PAHs, low-level PCBs, even though that's somewhat problematic. But there certainly shouldn't be any volatiles. And the other technical deficiency is the migration of groundwater pathway is not addressed. And we hope the new form will be at least a good prompter to say, hey, I don't have a section about migration or groundwater pathway. I better write one. Okay, another technical problem is extractable petroleum hydrocarbons remain unaddressed in accordance with the guidance document. EPH contamination in excess of the thresholds must be remediated or calculate an alternate threshold using the grain size analysis. And another thing we see is things are left over the 30,000 milligrams per kilogram ceiling. Again, that needs to be properly remediated. Okay, for the more administrative deficiencies, we see that the financial assurance document is not used, the correct one for financial assurance. When you look at the remediation funding source and financial assurance guidance, there's a separate section for financial assurance documents. Go right there. Using the remediation funding source documents is incorrect. We run about almost 50% of people not using the right model document. Okay, this is kind of borderline between administrative and technical. The GIS compatible map of the CEA, DNOS, or NOS in lieu of DNOS is not submitted. GIS compatible maps for the DNOS or NOS in lieu shape should be emailed, to the address for deed notices. And if you're submitting a CEA for historic fill, a GIS compatible map of the CEA shape should be emailed to the SRPGIS CEA web email site. And then questions, or I think we're leaving those to the end.
Okay, thank you, Mike. Does anyone in the audience have any questions for any of the speakers that we just heard? Okay, it does not appear as such. If you do, just raise your hand. We do have some questions from folks on the webinar that we are going to take. Okay, so the first one is, does using extrapolation warrant a variance? Okay, 1 second, we'll get you a microphone.
Okay, yeah, you're right. In the RA stage, in the RI stage, remedial investigation, I guess technically it would be a variance, but we're not really looking for it there. It's in the RA stage when it makes a difference. There, we're insisting upon point of compliance delineation. So if you don't have that, then that's a variance to the regulations that needs to be documented.
Yes, and just for folks on the webinar, we have a concurrence from everyone in the audience that multiple lines of evidence are certainly required for such information. So thanks, Mike. The next question, for RAP mods that only require address change for RAP transfers, is the NJDEP planning on allowing that to be automated and completed through the NJDEP online portal?
Yeah.
If you want to read the, do you want to look at the question?
Yeah. Right. Yeah. For address changes and transfers, it's business as usual until the new regulations come out. At which time it's not finalized yet. But right, we are going to be probably accepting these things through the portal, and instead of getting a whole new permit, we're just going to send you a letter saying the address has been changed to this, or the owner has been changed to this. But none of the details have been finalized yet.
All right, just hold on to that microphone for a second because I think this next one is going to be for you as well. Is there a phase-in period for use of the new RAP forms, or do they need to be used immediately?
For that, yeah, just make sure you start using the forms immediately, but if you already use the old form, we're not going to reject it. So we understand stuff's in the works already. So, but yeah, you should start using the new forms as soon as possible. But if you already use the old one or something's already signed and you're going to be submitted soon, then we're not going to reject that. So.
Okay. Thanks, Mike. The next question, what if the property owner refuses to file the deed notice?
Okay, the property owner either has to sign the deed notice or give permission for you to sign the deed notice. So if the owners will not sign, then you either have to remediate the property to unrestricted use, or else the case will not close.
All right. Thanks, Mike. One more question. Can you further clarify whether you can average to meet compliance in the RA stage at the property boundary?
Okay, the funny part of that question is at the property boundary. So if you are delineated, you can use compliance averaging to adhere to the compliance attainment guidance. But yeah, the key is if you're not delineated, you can't use the compliance averaging.
Okay, great. Thanks so much. And right now, that kind of concludes our questions. Again, online folks, if you continue to have questions, you can certainly ask them and they will be addressed via email. And next, okay, our next speaker, we have Mr. Bill Karp, who will be discussing migration and groundwater exposure pathway and capping.
Hello. All right, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I'm going to talk about the migration and groundwater exposure pathway as relates to remedial strategy. Specifically, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank my co-lead, Ann Charles, helped put these slides together. She couldn't be here today. Friendly reminder, when you are reaching out to the department, it would be advantageous to always include the co-contacts. So for consistency's sake, you may have noticed if you didn't include a co-contact, by and large, when we do reply, we do indeed copy that co-contact for, again, consistency's sake. So the objectives of this presentation today, pretty straightforward, basically trying to adhere to the two capping guidances as they relate to the migration of groundwater exposure pathway, formerly known as the impacted groundwater pathway. It is important to note that this is not new. I know a lot of people consider this new. The one guidance document came out in 2014, as the other came out in 2019. So relatively speaking new, but hopefully everyone's aware of this, and it's just an opportunity to generally go over some of the conditions that apply when attempting to use those guidance documents. We're going to go over some of the overarching principles, which can be applied to both guidance documents, as well as key points within each document, and most importantly, the issues that the soil reviewers see and how to try to get ahead of the curve and address that prior to any type of key document submission. So let's start with relevant guidance documents. Shortly after the amendments to remediation standards back in October of last year, I guess it was necessary to come out with the administrative guidance for migration of groundwater exposure soil remediation standards. Again, that kind of speaks to the last general question we had as it relates to if you compliance average below the applicable standard, then, and you have the point-by-point compliance, which you do need in order to use the compliance statement guidance document, you would therefore not need a deed notice, or more specifically, a soil reaction permit and the engineering control that would be associated with that. So again, if you're not overly familiar with that guidance, really short, sweet, kind of gets to the brass tacks of when you would need to be required for a soil reaction permit. Again, there was some confusion at that time. Hopefully this guidance document can help people better understand the requirements as it relates to the migration to groundwater exposure pathway. And here's the actual guidance documents. Their full names is, as you'll note, they're both named impacted groundwater. Again, same science principles behind it, now known as the migration to groundwater exposure pathway. So again, if you haven't gotten a chance to look at those guidance documents, I advise strongly to check those out. So some of those overarching principles I alluded to before. We have the low permeability caps, which theoretically will minimize the contaminant mobilization through the groundwater through infiltration of precipitation. As it speaks, the guidance document speaks directly to the type of low permeable and impermeable caps. That is the technical guidance for the capping of sites undergoing remediation, which came out in July of 2014. So right around the time the capping for the semi-inorganics and the metals are the inorganics. You can see, on the next slide, I'll have a couple cross sections as it relates to what that would entail. There's a lot of sort of nuances to it, but as you can see, it can include concrete foundations, geomembranes, clay barriers, geosynthetic clay liners, Portland concrete, and bituminous concrete, also known as asphalt. Something to always keep in mind, the cap condition, new or existing, cannot have caps. Cannot have damage or cracks. And also that the caps need to extend beyond the breadth of the AOC. So basically it needs to, be larger than the area to prevent infiltration coming in from the side. So as I alluded to before, here's, 4 separate low permeability caps. You can find these within the technical guidance on the capping of sites undergoing remediation, really pretty much right at the end, page 96 and 97. There you go. You can see it can get pretty costly depending on the acreage, and there's a lot of things to consider. So just keep that in mind. So to get into some of the intricacies of what I would consider the more readily digestible guidance document, the capping for the semi-volatiles and inorganics. Here you go, pretty simple. Again, this document's like page and a half tops, but you're going to want to have groundwater below groundwater remediation standards. When under those conditions, you're going to need a minimum of 2 feet soil buffer between the seasonal high water table. You're going to need the contamination within that clean buffer zone to be below the NJDEP standards. Something to note, this could be alternative remediation standards, certainly within your ability and latitude to do that. Something also to keep in mind. At that juncture, groundwater monitoring would not be required because groundwater is not contaminated, and there is indeed the need for a Soulwrap. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the need to address free and residual product. That's always should be at the forefront. In instances where groundwater is above the groundwater remediation standards, periodic groundwater monitoring would be required, be part of a groundwater monitoring plan, and it would also want to come in, simultaneously come in with a Soulwrap and the groundwater wrap with a CEA. And here's a little test your knowledge question. So a landscape, so am I going to read this? A landscape cap is appropriate to cap NJDEP exceedances for migration to groundwater exposure pathway exceedances. True or false? A, true. B, false.
All right, so we'll give the folks on the webinar a few moments to answer that poll. And also, just as a reminder, you can go to the SurveyMonkey link and fill out the survey questionnaire. Please be honest and let us know if there's other trainings that you'd like to see in the future. It's certainly helpful for us as we're putting these trainings together moving forward. So again, a landscape cap is appropriate to cap migration of groundwater exceedances. A, true. B, false. Give it just a few more seconds. Okay. And the answer to this question is?
There you go. And it's false.
B, false.
So moving right along, getting back to one of the paramount concepts of this presentation. What are some of the common issues that we see in relation to people trying to ascertain a soil remediation permit as it relates to exceedances of migration to groundwater exposure pathway. Specifically for the inorganics and the semi-volatiles, people aren't using the right type of cap. Again, hence that was what that question was before, kind of, pretty straightforward. Again, proof that the cap is in good condition. And again, best way to show that, photos worth 1,000 words. Let's take a couple photos in there. It's going to go a long way. The 2-foot clean soil buffer is not documented. And then these last 2 points, somewhat kind of interrelated, kind of the depth to the water table, right? So vertical delineation sampling isn't complete. Again, as you're probably all aware, that's to the water table, the unsaturated zone, and then the depth of groundwater. Hopefully if you have that delineation to the water table, you then know where the water table would be. Moving on to the more difficult, more nuanced guidance document, the capping volatile contaminants for the migration to groundwater exposure pathway. There's kind of a lot to unpack. So we'll go through it again. This is from very administrative, high-level thinking, and you're going to want to have to really familiarize yourself to get into some of the other details contained within that document. But let me just go over the main issues. A lot of it's kind of same for the inorganics and semi-volatiles. Again, there's going to have a different approach to whether groundwater is currently contaminated versus where it may become contaminated in the future. Again, just to reinforce the point, the migration to groundwater exposure pathway, again, is showing that groundwater may be impacted by soils in the unsaturated zone. Maybe it hasn't occurred yet, but in theory, that's what's happening with that contamination. So there's a couple flow charts. I'll go through them briefly, but again, just going over the overarching themes or principles. You got to have the low permeability cap. The cap needs to extend beyond the area, beyond the lateral extent of contamination of the area of concern, and the caps cannot be damaged. As it relates to volatiles, you still have to account for the downward migration in the vapor phase. Do that within the guidance document. So first and foremost, probably the more easy sort of thing to wrap your head around is where you have vadose zone contamination and the groundwater is already contaminated with those volatile organic compounds. Having that low permeability cap in place, as you'll see on the flow chart on the next slide, you're going to need to have 8 quarters of groundwater monitoring when that cap is already in place. So if you don't already have the cap in place, you're going to need to put the cap in place. You're going to have to wait 2 years to allow that soil vapor phase to equilibrate within that subsurface zone. Something else to sort of keep in mind, as these permits are issued, the onus is really on the permit. The person applying for the permit is at the end of the CEA timeframe. It would be, you could actually terminate all the you can terminate the engineering control, you can terminate the institutional control, provided that you then show that you have levels above that SRS or ARS MGW. So remember, as always with all these options, the ultimate teller is with the groundwater contaminant concentrations. So it's great to do these, but ultimately, if your groundwater is not going to clean up, you're not going to get to where you need to be. So here's that first groundwater contaminated flow chart. Pretty simple, straightforward. Is the site capped, right? If it isn't, then you're going to cap it and then wait for the 8 quarters. As always, you want to, one of the things that's super important about the volatile organic contamination within that subsurface zone is vapor intrusions. I'm sure everybody's aware. It's a big hot button issue. Always, always keep that in mind. That's something that, you can cap the site and then you can have some unintended consequences as it relates to where those vapors are going through other preferential pathways. So always be cognizant and aware of that. So move into the one that gets a little bit more tricky. It's when the vadose zone contamination has yet to reach the groundwater. So again, in theory, we got to look at it kind of from another different angle. In this instance, we collect soil vapor samples, which is the same or synonymous with the soil gas sampling as it relates to the field sampling procedures manual. Now, however, what you compare those levels to is actually a table that is only contained within this said guidance document, and that's table 1, known as the impact of groundwater soil vapor screening levels. And again, depending on soil conditions at the site, if you are below, then really you should be able to apply for a RAP. But again, there's also different scenarios as it relates to soil type and distance from the water table and everything else of that nature that gets pretty intense. So, you know, it's kind of why that star is there, fall guidance for these different scenarios. It's going to be something that you can't really readily explain through such a short presentation today. One thing that people would probably be aware of, or in that same vein of the vapor intrusion, you'll see that there's vertical separation distances, much like in the vapor intrusion guidance document, as it relates to, you know, the benzene, toluene, ethyl benzene, and xylene. Those volatile petroleum hydrocarbons, they have different steps due to that rapid degradation, and it may be a little bit easier if you have just those contaminants that you're dealing with at your site. And again, as always, 518 of the check regs, free residual product, get rid of it. Here's a pretty convoluted flow chart. As you can see, the first kind of upper left-hand corner, that's pretty straightforward. As I talked about, the VSDs, the vertical separation distances, you might be able to screen them out immediately. Beyond that, it gets a little bit more convoluted, but again, you're going to have to really familiarize yourself with that guidance document. And as to everyone's point, there's some latitude in there. You're definitely going to want to provide multiple lines of evidence, technical justification for any ways that you may have deviated from this guidance. And as you can see, there's a lot of different steps in there, so that may be something that could be necessary. And as we kind of wrap up here, no pun intended, some of the common RAP issues for volatiles, very much similar to the, you know, semi-volatiles and organics. The cap's not right, a little bit more. As you see in the flow chart, it's suggested or strongly advised that you come in with that groundwater RAP concurrently with the soil RAP. That's going to be your best way to demonstrate that modern natural attenuation is occurring. So as far as streamlining the process and making sure that you get those permits, it would be obviously in your best interest to do that. If you are for some reason submitting a soil-only RAR, keep in mind that you are still going to be required to demonstrate that modern natural attenuation is happening. So as much as one may argue that, oh, it's a soil, you know, final soil RAR, I don't need to, you know, include groundwater data, I would say, yeah, you're going to be wrong with that, because how are you going to demonstrate that you have those multiple lines of evidence, more specifically that modern natural attenuation is indeed occurring? So without that, don't really have much. And yeah, all the M&A requirements must be met. The site is capped, and again, there's decreasing trends. Just a quick snapshot of that updated form. It's really similar to the old form. So as far as people's questions about when should they use the new forms, I mean, a lot of it's pretty similar, especially as it relates to this specific section. As you can see, if you wanted to compare and contrast it to the old form that was out just a couple weeks ago, you'll just see most of it has to do with just the terminology between IGW and MGW. But to Mike's point, I mean, it's pretty straightforward. Anywhere, you know, you're answering no, go to section K, you know, spell it out, write in that final RAR explicitly how you deviated or varied from any of the rules or guidance accordingly, and you're going to have a lot better time getting those permits that you need to issue that final remediation document. So final thoughts, again, you're going to want to check out those guidance documents, familiarize yourself with that, you know, those flow charts, and always, you know, receptors, specifically, again, with the volatiles, you know, vapors, you know, it's going to be a big thing. I would suggest, you know, there may be some other compliance attainment options, ARS options stuff. They may be a better way to go about some of this, but again, I leave it to the LSRPs to exercise professional judgment accordingly. I do get a lot of questions. What should I do? Short answer is good luck, right? That's on you. That's all I have.
Okay, thank you, Bill. Thanks, Bill. Our next speaker this morning, we have Reina Leosa, who will be discussing notice in lieu of deed notice.
Good morning, everyone. Reina Leosa from Comores. Just really want to thank the department for really working with industry and the LSRPs on this whole process. The document has the notice in lieu of deed notice, and we have templates for the resolutions and written agreements, and that was the big holdup with the lawyers, with DEP, and we've gone back and forth. But it's a really great document. We're really going to go over the process, and it's really going to hopefully streamline some of the efficiencies working with municipalities, towns, counties, state, and federal agencies. So first of all, what is a notice in lieu of a deed notice? What I'm talking about is you have a site, you're contaminated, and it's extending off-site, where a piece of property that is non-deed notice, which means in English, it's a roadway, it's a sidewalk, it's an easement, it's something that you don't own. So you need to go who that property owner is and work with them that you would like to leave contamination on their site. Just want to be clear about this notice in lieu of deed notice. You do not file this document with the county. That was an eye-opener when we were discussing this in our RAP meetings, but this is one thing you don't do. And overall, really, the engineering controls need to be protective of where you are. So here's an example of the map. It's in the guidance document. So you see your site, and you see the roadway, and you see all the points of compliance if you're above. But this is actually one of the documents that you'll be submitting with your notice in lieu of a deed notice, is a figure where all your contamination is that you're remaining. So let's talk about the process. So the key here is figuring out who the property owner of is that easement, sidewalk, the roadway. So there's two options here. Municipalities and counties, we have a formal resolution, and I will admit that this is a real resolution that was used at a town. So we did use real live examples for this document. State and federal agencies, we have a model written agreement, and that's in Appendix 5. And I just want to really point out, and this is a lot of discussion about this, because, you know, when you're going to these agencies, they're not familiar with these documents. And the key is the written agreement and the resolution. It says it right in there that the owner acknowledges that we are leaving contamination there, and that this signature on these documents will carry you through going forward, subsequent of any changes to your RAP permit or applications or modifications. So it's really key of these point in this document. Also, we did the notice in lieu of a deed notice because, you know, you're supposed to take the model deed notice and then convert it into this notice in lieu that doesn't have a block and lot. Very confusing. We've got the template. And so it's really good that it's all in the document. It's one shop. Just want to point out that if there are significant changes, like if you are changing entire sections, you please need to call the DEP, the BRAP, because this is from the model deed notice and we tweaked it for the notice in lieu. So I want to highlight some of the differences with this notice in lieu of a deed notice. One being Section 8, we modified the language for supersedence or termination notice in lieu of deed notice. The big thing here is the exhibits. There's been some modifications. We're trying to make this simple and easy for all parties. Exhibit 1 is we're looking for a quad map with the location, names of the roads, or a similar map that you're going to put your site, you're going to put your location, you're going to have the roads, railways, whatever you need on one map. As you notice, when you do a regular deed notice, there's multiple maps. We tried to streamline it, making it one map. Exhibit B is a restricted area map that I showed previously. B2 is restricted area data table. And I just want to point out that the sample elevation is based upon depth below grade. It's not the mean sea level that's in the model deed notice. This will be changed when the rules eventually come out. And then the last part is Exhibit C. And this is about, you're writing about your institutional engineering control. You're going to do a description of the property, remedial activities, what you use, institutional engineering. And the last question is, what is your planned response in the event that there's something unacceptable with the institutional or the engineering control? You're going to explain what you're going to do, what steps you're going to do. That is a little bit different. So that's your notice in lieu of deed notice. So when you go to a town or a federal government, you're going to have your resolution and written agreement, and your notice in lieu of a deed notice. You're going to have those pieces of paper signed. As part of the notification with the notice in lieu, and just remember, we're not filing with the county, we're just sending that notice in lieu to all these regulatory agencies, entities, because we need to do notification that we're leaving contamination in the roadway, the sidewalk, the easements next to a railroad. So this is all out of the reg. We do have a template letter. You can modify that, the letter, what your needs, but we have put everything in the document to help you get through the process. So these are all the people that need to get that notice in lieu. Road department of each municipality, county, DOT, municipal clerk, mayor, governing body at each municipality, local, county, regional health department, municipality and county, all the utilities that are in your property that you're putting the deed notice. So, you know, gas, electric, sewer, cable, and any other utilities that's on that. So if you don't have the gas line in your property that you're restricting, don't send it to the gas company. So, I mean, you have to use some judgment. And then any other person who requests a copy of it. And just remember, the notice in lieu of a deed notice does not get filed with the county. So we got the resolution, we got the written agreement with the agencies, we got the notice and deed notice, all the signs. Now we can put together our application. And those documents, depending on the property owner, you would include it in your WRAP application, the documentation that you sent it to all the parties. Send that into the department. It is the Soulwrap permittee who's required to continue the monitoring and maintenance of the permit for the notice in lieu of a deed notice. So it's a Soulwrap permittee. Also, let's say afterwards there's some changes to the written agreement or resolution for whatever reason, just put that in after you have your Soulwrap permit, put it in your next biannual cert. So that's the process. So what happens if there's changes in the notice in lieu of a deed notice going forward in the future? So I see two options. So let's say we have a roadway and we have contamination in the road, and all of a sudden the water company decides we're going to dig up those galvanized pipes. But you know what? There's contamination in that roadway. Well, we could have two options. They go in and they remove some of the contamination, but there is contamination left still. So that would be a modification, and you would go through that process. What happens, let's say that water company comes and takes all your contamination away. You get to terminate your notice in lieu of a deed notice, which would be the best option for everybody. And then at that point, you would go through the notice of deed notice termination, except you don't have to do sections F, which was the deed notice that was filed with the county, which we are not doing, and J is the property owner. Remember, we had the resolution or written agreement, that signature stays. So you don't ever want to get rid of or keep. They're like your golden ticket, the resolutions and written agreement. You send your deed notice termination form to the department, they'll review it, they'll approve it, and then you get to decide. Then at that point, you can send your notification letters telling everybody under the sun that your contamination has been removed and you're terminated your notice in lieu of a deed notice. At that point, you can do your termination application. And like I said, the first example is more of about a mod application if that happens. So those are the differences in the future about the notice in lieu of a deed notice. And that concludes.
All right, thank you so much, Raina. We are going to take a 5-minute break. I have 10:20, so if you could all be back here at 10:25, we'll get started again then. Thank you.
Let's get started with our next presenter, Mr. Mike Enfanger, who will be discussing RFS and FA. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Mike Enfanger again to talk about financial assurance, everyone's favorite subject. Yeah. Okay, financial assurance is mandated by the Site Remediation Reform Act, and it's established to regulate, it's for permits, and to establish, to regulate operation, maintenance, and inspection of the engineering and institutional controls. NJSA 58:10C-19 specifically establishes financial assurance. Yeah, you will see that citation on every financial assurance document. If you see 58:10B-3, that's the Brownfields Act, okay? And if you see that on a document, it is not financial assurance. That's a remediation funding source. Okay, there are some exemptions to financial assurance requirements. One would be a government entity, and we typically think of towns, municipalities. Also included are quasi-governmental, like the Turnpike, the Parkway, and also public universities are considered public entities. We have what we call in the vernacular the innocent purchaser exemption. And we use this simple phrase rather than saying you're not liable for pursuant to the Spill Act and blah, blah, blah. We just say, are you innocent? Did you cause the discharge? Then you're not innocent. Then you're always responsible for it. But if you bought the property and you did not contribute to the discharge, we're calling you innocent. And as far as purchasing, you had to purchase the property before May 7th, 2009. Also exempt are child cares and schools. Schools are defined as K through 12. Also, if it's a primary, secondary residence, we're not requiring financial assurance. And the operator of a small business who is performing remediation at their property, and I put that in bold there. And I've been asked, when would this come up? And some examples of that would be, suppose you're a small business, you have a permit, and then you sell the property. So somebody else comes in as the owner, but now you don't own the property anymore. So you don't have this small business exemption anymore. Another example would be if you're getting a notice in lieu. So you might be a small business, but you don't own that property. So you would be getting 2 permits. You'd be exempt for your own permit, but not for the permit for the notice in lieu. And please note that all parties have to have an exemption in order for the permit not to have an exemption. If one party is not exempt, then they have the responsibility of posting the FA. Now, we don't really care who does it, but the responsibility is there. Okay, for residential condominiums, okay, the permittee an FA mechanism is not required to be secured if they submit their annual budget. So it's not really an exemption. They're just satisfying their financial assurance through submission of the annual budget. And when you do so, the association should indicate the line items that constitute the permit costs. And sometimes they list things as administrative or engineering, something that's not obvious. Please point that out to us. And you'll find that condo budgets are kind of written in stone. It's a big deal for them to change it. So you can't really tell them, please put in a line for permits. Okay, so when you're submitting a remedial action permit application, you will be submitting the remediation cost review and RFSA form. Okay, this is especially important for the signatures. Would be section J if it's the PRCR who's posting it, or section K if it's somebody else. And this satisfies our certification. We used to have a certification page, but banks hated them because they said, well, this doesn't have anything to do with us. So we made a decision that the signature on the form will serve as the certification. And we will want the original financial assurance instrument. Please note there's no 1% surcharge on financial assurance, as there is with remediation funding source. We have occasionally gotten checks for 1% of the FA amount, and we just have to send them back. Okay, the types of mechanisms for financial assurance are a remediation trust fund, you know, and that's a cash essentially held in escrow by a trustee. You get a line of credit from a bank, and that's an open line of cash available, usually using the property as the collateral, you know, much like a home equity line of credit. The letter of credit is a promise of cash to a beneficiary, which will be, of course, the department. An environmental insurance company, insurance policy, which will be a claims-based available funds to the DEP. So the DEP has to be the beneficiary on the policy. And a surety bond. Okay, with a surety company, there is not yet in the rules. It is slated to be in the new rules, but we are allowing their use before they show up in the rule. Okay, where do you find these? Okay, these templates. Well, you would go to the forms webpage, and the easiest way to do it is scroll all the way to the bottom and count up 7 lines, and you come up with this nifty link, RFS guide. You know, click that link, and you come up to the RFS FA page. And I think I've mentioned this before. Notice there are 3 sections. You want that middle section that says financial assurance. You use one of these other sections. The top one is the remediation funding source. That has that brownfield citation. And then direct oversight is a whole nother thing. The middle section is where the FA documents are. Okay, note about environmental insurance policy. We do not have a model document, so they are evaluated on a case-by-case basis. And again, they must comply with the ARCS rule at 5.5, which essentially says the department must be able to make a claim on the policy. So a lot of times people say, "Oh, I have environmental insurance policy." Well, who's on there? Well, usually it's the permittee applicant himself. So if that's the case, the policy has to be either modified or a rider added to include the department. There can't be any exclusions or deductibles. And again, you know, old policies will have to be changed. Okay, the amount that you calculate for the financial assurance would be the cost of maintaining the engineering control, including the maintenance, the upkeep, servicing. For a groundwater permit, it might be labor, power, sampling, and of course biennial reporting and fees. And this value is calculated over the duration of the engineering control. For a soil permit, that would usually be a cap, and the cap would be considered a permanent remedy. So we'll consider 30 years as the duration. At a minimum estimate of about $1,000 a year, that makes the minimum value $30,000. Okay, new in the guidance is a section on present value calculations. Okay, the amount posted for financial assurance may follow this formula. The amount you post is the amount you calculate for the FA divided by the discount rate to the 30th power. Okay, the discount rate is the actual interest rate you're obtaining, or if you can't come up with a number, then you use a published value. The OMB circular A94 is a key source for this. Appendix C has a 30-year value. Right now it's 1.7%, but it is updated periodically. Okay, in the guidance as an example, I have, let's say you want to know the amount to be posted, and you say, well, I just have the minimum here, $30,000, and the applicant wants to use a trust fund. So you call the trustee and say, what's the interest rate that you're giving on these type of accounts? And the trustee says, oh, it's a 1.36%. Okay, so you go put 1.3% in your calculation and come up with the answer. You would post $20,000 to in your trust fund for your financial assurance. Okay, it is possible you're in the middle of a remediation and you're getting a permit, you know, for a an area of concern, RAO. Okay, and you want to use the existing remediation funding source as the FA. Okay, what you would do is ensure that there are detailed operation and maintenance costs in your estimate. You'd provide a copy of the remediation funding source and then check the box on the application saying using RFS as FA. One tricky point is, from the remediation funding source point of view, is always check the box on the form, the RFS FA form, that you're using the RFS as FA. So why don't we take a look at that? If you look at section C on the RFS FA form and go all the way to the bottom of the section, you'll see using an RFS as FA. Check that box every time, or else you don't know where that form's going to end up. Okay, you could be in the situation where you're doing an RAO for the entire site. Okay, so you want to transition the RFS to the FA. Again, you would make sure the costs are calculated, and you would make a request to the RFS unit to you're usually reducing the amount of RFS to the FA amount. Then the RFS unit will request a review of the RAR. The department has up to 3 years to review. And when the review is complete, you would amend the instrument and the amount for the amount and the FA format. At that point, the RFS unit will forward the document to the permitting bureau. But again, you don't know when the department is going to be get to this RAR. So this is not really recommended. In this case, it's probably better to establish a new financial assurance instrument. Okay, now to amend these instruments for a trust fund agreement, there is a section in the trust fund agreement that allows you to modify it. But to do that, you have to get everybody to initial all the changes, send it to the department, then we initial it and send it back. So it's just as easy just to submit a new agreement, and we'll just send the old one back to the trustee. For a line of credit, the banks generally will not amend them. If you need a change, then you need to submit a new document. We'll send the old one back. With surety bonds and insurance policies, it varies widely through the industry. Just check with the provider. Now, letters of credit are by far the most common financial instrument for FA, so they deserve their own slide. You'll note that it says, the model document says irrevocable standby letter of credit. For our purposes, that means any change in the document requires an amendment, and most amendments will require the department to approve them. Now, one foible is, for banks, these are push-button documents. Nobody's generating them. So there will be no information from the original letter on the amendment. So please have the applicant ask the bank to put the PI number on the amendment. Okay, that will help us immensely. And when we get these, to know what case is this, because we have lots of these. Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Mike. Up next, we have Neil Rivers to talk about transfers and modifications.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Before I started, I just wanted to acknowledge a longtime friend, former colleague of many of the people in the room, Dr. Barry Frasco, who has been fortunate enough to retire. Today is National Chocolate Ice Cream Day. And anyone that knows Barry knows that he started with whatever day it was today. So Barry, I hope you are having chocolate ice cream today on this beautiful summer day. Okay, I'm going to talk about the soil remedial action permit modifications and transfer process. Give you a quick overview of the agenda. I'm going to be covering sections 10 through 13 of the Soulwrap guidance. Between the guidance that Mike talked about earlier, the recent guidance, and the instructions on the form, you really should have the information you need to answer most of the questions and complete most of the applications that I'm going to be talking about here today. So, kicking right off, I'll talk about Soulwrap modifications. But first, a public service announcement. Please, your site may have a deed notice, an older deed notice, that specifies a hotline call in the instances where a cap is being disturbed. Be aware that in 2018, the ARCS rules changed and they eliminated that requirement. The 2018 ARCS rules trump the deed notice. So you don't need to make a hotline call in that instance. You're going to deal with the situation either as a permit modification or as part of your next biennial certification report. Okay. Now into Soulwrap modifications. So under what circumstances do we need to modify an existing soil remedial action permit? Well, changes to institutional controls. If the engineering control is going to change, you're going to put in a different cap, for example. If the permittee address changes, or if you're adding another person responsible for conducting remediation. Note that changes in the institutional engineering controls will also require a change to the deed notice. I'm going to discuss that in more detail later, but I do want to just put the reminder out there. When you are changing a deed notice, this is not something that you just modify and submit to the county. You need to terminate the old deed notice and replace it. Okay. So the process of applying for a soil remedial action permit. What do you do? Well, it's pretty straightforward. First and foremost, you're going to get the forms on the department's forms webpage. As I'm sure most of you know by now, those forms are all placed together in one portion of that webpage. Complete the forms and submit them. Make sure you submit the application fee. You need to provide hard copies and electronic copies of that wrap form that's available on the webpage, and a cover letter, essentially just providing an explanation of the reason for the modification. It may be a more detailed technical memorandum if there's additional data or so forth. But essentially providing the department and permit writer an understanding of the basis for the change. You're also going to submit electronic copies of the remediation cost review and FA form, if that's applicable. And if it's applicable, meaning that if there's the need for a financial assurance, not exempt. And an electronic copy of the recorded deed notice or the filed notice in lieu, depending on the instances Raina explained. It's important. DEP needs the D notice and associated exhibits, or notice in lieu and associated exhibits, as a independent or separate PDF copy. They're going to include that in your remedial action permit. So rather than having to peel that out of a larger document, provide it as a single electronic copy. And then provide electronic copies of everything in PDF format on a CD. You can submit all of those as a single document, a single CD, a single file on that CD. A few reminders. Any change to a deed notice requires the deed notice termination and refiling. I mentioned that earlier. I'll cover that process next in the next section of my presentation. If the PRCR currently identified on a RAP can only be changed or modified if that entity no longer exists. So if your PRCR is named on the RAP, that entity would have to either, if it's an individual, have passed, or if it's a company or entity, it no longer exists. Essentially, once a PRCR, always a PRCR, they're going to remain a co-permittee on the permit, even if, for example, the property changes hands to another owner. Okay, so the modification process, talked about that. Now we're going to shift over to the deed notice termination process. I'm going to walk you through the steps of that and understand, again, this is a process that you use for any changes to the deed notice. Okay. So under what circumstances or conditions would you terminate a deed notice? Well, you're going to, for example, you're going to modify the deed notice to reflect a change in the institution or engineering control. If you're going to change the site boundaries, perhaps there's a subdivision, and Karen will talk a little bit about subdivisions later. But if there's a subdivision of an existing site where you have a remedial action permit, now you have new lots and blocks defined. If the property has been modified by eminent domain such that the property boundaries change, those are going to require modifications to the institutional control, certainly, potentially the engineering control, and would be a requirement to modify the deed notice. Perhaps you're going to have a change in remediation standards that alters the areas of exceedances. Now, I want to be clear. The deed notice does not need to be changed in the instance that the department simply modifies its remediation standards. The May 2021 standard modifications don't require all of us to go running out and change every one of our deed notices. But if the remedy is going to be modified as a result of a change in the remediation standards, it's likely that the area of impact is going to be modified. The concentrations that are identified in the deed notice are going to be different, and it's in those instances where you're going to modify the deed notice and go through the termination process. If, for example, you identify that you can use one of the compliance options in the compliance and attainment guidance, or develop an alternative remediation standard that will allow you to reduce the size of footprint of the area of contamination on the site. Doing that would be a process that you'd modify your remedial action permit. You'd also need to change the deed notice, go through the termination process as well. Okay, you've got that, right? Terminate, replace, okay? The procedures are outlined in Appendix 1 of the guidance document. So this is talked about in Section 13. The procedures are in a detailed way. Sort of the old department cheat sheet has found its way to Appendix 1 of this guidance document. It's pretty straightforward and helpful. So I'll run through the procedures here pretty quickly for you, stepwise. First, you're going to use the model termination of deed notice document. It's available on the forms page. You're going to complete the original version of that document, signatures in ink, raised seal, notary seal. Some portions of that document are going to be left blank at this first step in the process. There are going to be sections that are finalized by the department. Next step, you're going to send that partially complete document to the department through BCANE. You're going to include a cover letter explaining the purpose for the deed notice termination. You're going to complete the deed notice termination or termination of deed notice form along with it. And you're going to provide any technical information necessary if additional remediation was conducted that supports these changes or modifications. Note that in this instance, I identify that could come through as potentially come through as a letter or a report, technical memorandum, or it could come through as an updated remedial action report or an additional remedial action report. One thing to note, the department does not need a new RAR to go through the portal. You don't need to submit that RAR through the portal if an RAR had been previously submitted and was the basis for your original Soulwrap. So you submit that RAR with this application to BCANE, not through the portal process. Okay. Step 3. Well, now the department's going to act on the document. So you've submitted that partially complete document. The department's going to sign it and return the notice of termination to the individual identified. And that individual or that entity will work to file that notice of termination with the county clerk. Ideally, the deed notice, the new deed notice is also filed concurrently with that process. So you're doing the one-for-one replacement at that time. And again, Raina talked about notice in lieu. Similar process, a little bit different. Notice in lieu doesn't get filed with the county clerk. So if you're working through the notice in lieu process, follow the things she described. If you're dealing with the deed notice, it's Appendix 1. Follow this information here. And then finally, once the deed notice has been recorded by the county and you've got documentation that it has been, you're going to use copies of that recorded deed notice to update the soil remedial action permit, whether it's an initial, new initial permit, a modification, or termination. Again, Section 13 of the guidance identifies the specific hard copy and electronic copy requirements for the various documents that, and Appendix 1 takes you through this process. Okay. Next, I'll talk a little bit about remedial action permit transfers and change of property ownership. So, applying for a transfer or change of ownership. Change in owner, let me say this before I get started. A change in owner will necessitate a change in the co-permittee, right? So that's a different process. The change, so we apply within 60 days of the sale or transfer of the property. We, you know, in the instance where there are any questions about the RAP changes or transfers, talk to BRAP, right? So it's pretty straightforward. Your client sells to a new entity, well, that's pretty straightforward. But if it's a change in lessee or some other form of lease termination, there could, for example, be ISRA implications or other aspects. So the department wants you to reach out to the BRAP folks in those instances, just to make sure that that we're following all the right procedures and you know, making sure that that the changes that are made are the appropriate ones. Okay. So applying for that permit transfer or that transfer change, pretty straightforward process. You know, we've got a form for that. Right? We're going to use a hard and electronic copy of the form available on the website, so that the department gets the wet signatures as well as the electronic or PDF version, and then finally any electronic copies of the RFS FA submission. And, you know, again, the department there just wants to make sure that the financial assurance is going to be satisfactory and remain in place. Okay. In the transfer change process, the new property owner needs to sign on as a co-permittee before the former owner is removed from the RAP. So your client, if they are just simply the property owner and not the PRCR, is not going to get removed from the soil remedial action permit until the department knows there is going to be somebody there who's stepping into their shoes. Similarly, the department's not going to release the money until there's a new FA in place, right? You use, use the contact information change form, not the transfer change form, if you're updating the person who's got primary responsibility, the contact for primary responsibility. And finally, provide all the electronic copies in PDF form on a CD. Another public service announcement. Check your fee status before you submit these documents to the department. The department may refuse to process modification, transfer, and/or termination applications if there are unpaid RAP fees, including past due fees, or if there are any previously required remedial action permits that have not been applied for. Okay, Nicole.
All right, thanks, Neil. For the folks on the webinar, we have a test your knowledge question. The question, a transfer change of property ownership form should be submitted within how many days of a property sale? A, 15, B, 30, C, 60, or D, 90? So folks on the webinar, please choose your answer carefully. And as a reminder, you need to be participating in these test your knowledge questions in order to receive your CECs. So please do answer. You're not being graded here, but you do have to select an answer. So again, as a reminder, please fill out the SurveyMonkey that you can find in the chat. The link is in the chat. And we'll just give you another few moments. And the poll is closed. So Neil, the answer is C, 60 days.
A little worried about that. Okay, everyone. Thank you, Nicole. Okay, we're in the home stretch. Last topic for me anyway, the contact change information process. Okay, this is a form that has that is used in only limited circumstances, but it is important. You're using it to modify the contact information only for the PRCR and the property owner who's currently identified in the Soulwrap. So that doesn't mean the name of the entity. That means their contact information. Who is the individual the department needs to contact? What is their phone number? What is their email address? Right? Not a change in company name, not a change in mailing address. If the co-permittee is going to take on as the primary contact for permit compliance. Remember, Mike talked about that earlier. So if there's going to be a change to that primary contact for permit compliance, or if the fee billing contact person's information will change. Now, the fee billing person is the individual that's going to get the invoice from the department for the remedial action permit annual fees. Okay. Important to know that this process is really a change in NGEMS only, in the department's database, right? It's an administrative change for, as I mentioned earlier, for the department folks to know who to contact if necessary. You are not going to get a modified remedial action permit that shows those changes as part of this process. You know, if on the other hand, you're changing the PRCR or a property owner's mailing address, changing the PRCR who's currently identified for the site, those require Soulwrap modifications, follow the procedures that I discussed in the prior section. Okay, pretty straightforward. Hard and electronic copies of a single form found on the department's website. Provide the electronic copies as a PDF. I think we all know that. And the good news here, it doesn't cost anything. So no check required. Just send it in. It's a freebie. Okay, that's it for me.
All right, we are going to take questions. Is there anyone in the audience right now who has questions? We have a question over there.
Hi. Just Mike and Finger, just a follow-up about the financial assurance. I thought it was the PRC, the primary person who's doing the compliance, that is required to have the financial assurance. But then you made a remark that it can be anybody. Did I misunderstood?
Yeah, it could be anybody. Posting or responsible for. It could be the PRCR has an exemption, but the owner doesn't. Then the owner would be.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
So that's what you meant about the other person. So
Right. So right. All permittees have to be exempt for the permit to be exempt from
got it.
FA.
Okay. Thank you for that clarification.
Okay, yeah. And if I could just make a modification to the last slide, it said hard copies of the contact information form should be submitted, and they really shouldn't be. Just through the portal is good enough.
Are there any other questions from the room before I switch to webinar questions? Okay. All right, I think this next question is going to be for Bill. It's about migration to groundwater. How far beyond the impacted area must the cap extend?
Beyond. Professional judgment. I know you guys like to use it, so go for it, Connect 4.
It's blinking back and forth between green and red. All right, the next question is, do we document the 8 quarters of groundwater monitoring for VOC MGW caps in Section K of the Soulwrap application?
That's a lot to put in that little section. I would advise putting it in your remedial action report. That's a great place to put information. You can reference it in Section K, but you're going to have a hard time fitting it on that one form. Attachment, appendices, however you want to articulate that sentiment, it should be within the final remediation document.
All right, the next question is, it says, I find municipalities difficult in obtaining approval to do a resolution and sign wraps. Has anyone gotten this done?
The answer is yes. That resolution was for a municipality in Essex County, and it was one of our SHRIN members who was able to successfully get that through with the municipality and the resolution. But that was prior to the new resolution that we put together. What the acknowledgement is, once you have that resolution and the notice in lieu of a deed notice signed, you're golden. So it is going to be a long process. There's no kidding around municipalities or the county, or for that matter, when you're going to New Jersey Transit or Amtrak or CSX. I mean, it's going to be difficult. I'm hoping the goal was to get the documents in the guidance document, because we vended them through us, industry, LSRP, and also DEP. So it's laid out in the document. You're just going to have to work through it and get through the process. Thank you.
All right, we have time for a couple more questions here. What is the timing for when a deed notice termination needs to be submitted? In other words, does the termination need to be submitted within a number of days after construction is completed for the new cap?
Okay, I don't think this question doesn't come up too often. There is a guideline in the deed notice of 60 days. And we don't really, set our clocks by that, but it's just that it is a finite period. You can't say, well, we're getting around to it. So the answer would be a 60-day turnaround.
They notify you if it's going to be longer than that?
Right, if it's going to be longer, it would be useful to notify. You could use my email and say, I'm going to be over the 60 days for such and such reason. That's something I could put into to the computer system. So that would help with enforcement, our inspectors and such.
Okay, and one more question here. Do we need to update the deed notice if lot numbers are modified?
No, this was taken out of the regulations in 2018, or it might have been before that. If you're looking at an older version of the ARCS rule, it does say change the deed notice. If the municipality changes the lot and block numbers. But if we did that, we would be the Bureau of Jersey City modifications, because they change their lot and block numbers all the time. So it was decided to change the rule, I think in 2018, to not have make those modifications.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. That's all the time we have for questions right now. Up next, we have Karen Barnes.
Hi, everyone. I'm Karen Barnes, LSRP VP at Langen, and I'm not going to do all the work. I'm going to ask you to help me get through my slides. My intent here is to kind of roll everything up, give you some case examples, and ask you questions as we go along. Before we start, I too want to acknowledge the process that we have all gone through together. We've been together as a group for over 2 years, and I can tell you this group has worked for you very diligently. We have labored over every sentence, over every question, over every use of the word, with the sole intent of trying to make it easier to understand and easier to get soil wrap approvals. You too, if you'd like to look at specific language and argue over word choices, we're happy to have you as part of the group in the future. But it has been 2 years in the process, and we do hope that with these additional questions and prompts, the things that cause us trouble, we now kind of make clear if this is not an issue to make you explain it. So hopefully the end result of this is to have a more approvable permit process. Oops, there we go. So I'm going to walk through and kind of wrap up everything else folks have said, from Kathy to Mike's and everybody, and Raina, and pull together how to get through a soil permit. We'll talk about some common pitfalls and problems, the things you need to submit, and then as time goes by, obviously we always want to make sure we're protective. That's our main goal. But what happens when you need modifications and terminations? And I'll end with a somewhat complicated example at the end, which you guys are all going to help me to get through the process for that project. So just a quick question. I get a question from time to time. If I do my compliance averaging, I do my attainment demonstrations, and I meet my residential standards, but I have some samples that are above, do I still need a permit or a deed notice? The answer to that is no. You've demonstrated compliance to be below the most restrictive. We're not talking about those soil issues here. But the flip side is that a permit is needed anytime your soil is above standards. Again, the compliance demonstration puts you below it. You don't need it in that. So everybody in the room, what's the #1 pitfall to getting your permit? Oh man, that was underwhelming. Yes, the answer's on the screen. Woo! All right. So it's delineation, 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 delineation. And I know it sounds, oh, that's easy. You just draw a circle and then you're there. Us practitioners know it's not always easy to get to delineation. You need your horizontal, you need your vertical. As Kathy said earlier, we could project it or model it at the RI phase. Now that we're at RA, you need a real point to get there, and it has to be to the most restrictive standards. Even though my site's going to be addressed as a non-residential, I need to make sure I am delineated to the most stringent, which is often the migration to groundwater. And okay, we can get to delineation, but there's a couple other things that kind of get in our way from time to time. We talked about the free product limit. If you have a site-specific free product limit or the 30,000, you got to make sure you're dealing with that. You can't leave. Well, you tell me, what can you do with free product? Oh God, guys, did you get your coffee? What's going on here? You have to do what with free product? Delineate and remediate to what? The extent practicable, or contain. Thank you. All right. It was a group effort here, but we got to the answer there. Oftentimes that takes very strong multiple lines of evidence, and your site conceptual model is very important to getting to those decisions. The thing that always trips me up is historic fill. I suspect you guys get those too. There's a historic fill everywhere we go. We have to make sure that our site-specific discharges are different than our historic fill and deal with them separately. Can't just roll them all up and say, oh, everything's historic fill here. If you're like me, eco gets you coming and going. There's always some sort of ecological concern, and we're trying to think of your permits and your deed notice and how to deal with that. We'll have a couple of examples for eco. And then I find it's hard to delineate when you have a surface water body right next to you and how to get past that. Or some just common obstacles and obstructions, thinking back to arena or to roads, or just physical obstructions to get in there. We'll go through a couple of examples of there. All right, so this is pretty straightforward. Horizontal delineation. I've got my purple line. I'm pretty well delineated. It didn't take me too much effort. So sometimes it's pretty straightforward. Sometimes you have to do 17 step outs to get to your delineation point, but still, okay, not too bad. But then sometimes you just don't get there. And if you're here and you see your question marks around the edges of it and you're not delineated, you are not ready for your remedial action permit. I could have just kind of brought my purple lines around and said, I'm approximately delineated. You really need to button up those gaps there. All right. Help me with a case example, because again, I don't like to lecture. I would like to have some interaction. I have my AOC 3. I've got a couple of red dots there. Am I delineated, Mike Poland?
No, because of the red dots.
Mike says I am not delineated. Does that change your mind? There's my historic fill map of the area. Mike, are you persuaded? Mike's not persuaded. In this case, we have regional historic fill out there, and it covers the majority of my site. So if this is historic fill, do I have to delineate beyond my property boundary? No, thank you. All right, you guys are waking up. However, if that is not related to historic fill, if my compounds, in this case, lead, arsenic, if I can't prove them to be related to my historic fill, Mike Infanger, do I still have to go off site? If it's a site-related discharge, yes. If I can't relate it, Mike tells me this all the time. If it's a site-specific one, you have to go off site. But in this case, we determined it was historic fill. We had enough evidence to show it was historic fill. And actually, my project manager's in the room, so don't correct me if I'm going here. We were able to compliance average my historic fill to below the non-residential. So we are above res, but we're below the residential. Do I need to cap it? Julian? I need to deed notice it. My control is going to be an institutional control for deed notice. I don't need to cap it because it's below non-residential, unless it was related to a specific discharge. But we're going to say this one's historic fill. All right, on the top right corner there, I have a little red dot. I kind of ran out of room. What happens with that if I can't delineate and I have this big surface water body here? Thoughts? Variance, I like that. Okay, sorry, I ran out of earth. There's no more place to go. How about another option? Anybody, any creative thinkers in the room? I see you thinking in the back. Maybe soil pore water samples or sediment samples or something to try and get there. And then kind of build my lines of evidence, say, in my section K. I ran out of room because I'm right next to it. I did my ecological sampling. I'm below my eco screening levels, things like that. Kind of build your lines of evidence with that. Excellent. In this particular case, I don't need my cap because I just need my institutional control. But I do have ecological exceedances along the site boundary. Do I need a permit for that? Well, I'm really well vegetated. I don't really want to knock down my trees and put in a permeable boundary along the waterway there. You know, we generally don't like to knock down trees. So I had a technical consult with the DEP and said, hey, we're really well vegetated. There's no scouring. There's no evidence of erosion. It's not getting worn away. And we looked at each other. We looked at pictures. We even did a drone and said, yeah, we all pretty much agree. The trees are doing their job. The vegetation is doing well. But DEP says, I have to make sure that that stays that way. I have to maintain my protectiveness. So where do we catch that? That can get caught in the soil permit. So our soil permit here is going to say, I need my deed notice, but we're going to do inspections along the shoreline to make sure the vegetation remains there. So remember that. I'm going to show you an example of section K later where we talk through this one. All right, you with me? Make sense? All right. So we were talking pretty much horizontal delineation there. Nobody brought up vertical delineation. We should have gotten vertical delineation in the first one. With this one, I just want to impress upon the idea of having your multiple lines of evidence and really understanding your site conceptual model. In this particular one, I have 2 different plumes and 2 different water-bearing zones. And my red dot to show me that I have a soil exceedance in the unsaturated zone only tells me so much. Okay, maybe I have a discharge there. In this case, it was a point discharge. But if I'm trying to figure out why my groundwater concentrations are an exceedance in a deeper water-bearing zone, that particular point's not going to tell me much. So make sure you have a very robust, comprehensive site conceptual model. All right. I'm going to walk through 2 other ones, and I want you to remember, deviate from rules, vary from, guys, what'd you say? All right, so on the left-hand side, we did a very thorough investigation. We did some remediation, but the projected area of impact went into the middle of the Garden State Parkway. Am I gonna be able to put a delineation point there? I don't want to, no thank you. But I'll tell you that my soil sample along the edge of it was super close to the standard. The standard was 1, I was at 1.6. I couldn't quite round down. What can I do? Nobody? We go out, give up? Somebody said variance out here. I'm going to tell the department that I have delineation, you know, most of the way around that circle, and my point right in the middle adjacent to the parkway. It was only 0.6 above the standard. I'm going to tell them it's less than an order of magnitude. I'm going to tell them I cleaned everything up. I'm going to tell them that it's unsafe for me to go drill a soil sample in the middle of the turnpike. I'm going to tell them it's low occupancy. Nobody's going to be exposed to that. And that road's pretty good cap, right? Nobody's going to be exposed to that. So basically, I'm putting my lines of evidence together. I'm not just going to say, sorry, permit group, I'm done. I just couldn't get that sample. So, Raina, is there something else I need here? I could do a notice in lieu. I think I'm going to try and convince the department that I'm mostly delineated on site first, because just 1 sample 0.6 above, but you're very right. I might have to go look at a notice in lieu. Thank you. All right. So on the right side there, we're delineated up to our surface water body. And I apologize, my blue line should have been where the surface water body is. That's off to the side there. But I'm delineated right up to the surface water body, and I'm not delineated. What could be some lines of evidence here? I'm talking about soil. A pore water sample, kind of like what we talked about before. Should I go across the stream looking for a sample? Louder? downstream. I could look at that. I could look at my stream profile here. What's going to help me make my decision? I'm going to suggest a really robust site conceptual model again here. If my surface water body is kind of a regional water feature where groundwater divide is, I'm going to look about where my sources were. Is it possible that my soil, if it's really shallow, it's probably not going to go across the stream and show up on the other side. But if it's a deeper sample, it might be able to migrate under the stream bed. So again, very robust site conceptual model. Doesn't help me that my site is bounded by train tracks either. So that's a whole nother example there. All right, so let's talk about the actual engineering controls and institutional controls themselves. Number one thing, are we protective? Is this doing its job? You're gonna ask yourself, does a presumptive remedy apply? When does a presumptive remedy apply? Answers on the board. Anybody? Anybody? Yep, schools, childcares, and residences. If I don't have that for my site, can I still put in a presumptive remedy? Sure, why not? That's a pretty good place to start thinking about it, right? And if I put in what my put in a presumptive remedy, chances are, Mike, you're not going to really question me much. I met a presumptive guidance, even though it's a business. You're probably going to be okay with that. I'm hoping. All right. But then we have to talk about the intended use as well. My cap might be different if I am on a walkway for a park versus a big trucking facility. And I'm an LSRP, I'm a geologist, I'm not an engineer. So I'm gonna go to my fellow engineers and say, all right, when you design this building, when you design this pavement, please convince me that it's gonna withstand the truck traffic. And I'm gonna work that balance between what was installed, is it engineered correctly, and if I feel there's some weaknesses in it, to have a more robust monitoring schedule to make sure that I'm inspecting it enough to make sure it meets it. All right. This is new in the form, and we talked about this for well over a month, I think. The forms now say that if you have less than 8 inches of hardscape and subbase in total, you need to provide justification of why you're doing 8 inches or less. That doesn't mean you can't. That doesn't mean it's not appropriate. You just have to explain to the department why you would be doing less than that. And I can appreciate their side of the table. Up till now, we put down our caps, we get our deed notices, we submit our permits, and maybe there's 2 inches and 2 inches, and then the department goes, I can't do anything about that if I'm not thinking that's protective enough. Hopefully we'll get caught in the biennial certifications. We talked about notice in lieu. We talked about any variances or deviations from rules or guidance. And I just want to put out there too, maybe you guys, like me, have a lot of PCB impacts. You need to make sure that you're meeting the TSCA requirements for your investigations and your TSCA caps as well. All right. So here is a protectiveness demonstration using multiple lines of evidence. Again, I have historic fill right on the edge of a waterway. I don't know why. I have many of those that have historic fill right on the waterway. I don't necessarily want to knock down these trees, so I'm going to put my lines of evidence together. I've done a very thorough PA. There's never been any operations on the site there. It's never been developed. I walked through. I saw no signs of stressed vegetation. But I don't want to cap it. These are nice trees. Nobody's getting there. So I'm going to say to the department that it's access is very limited. Nobody's coming in on boats. Nobody can get to the majority of the site because there's a drainage ditch there. There's actually a main utility line running right next to the property. So most people are trying to stay away from that utility line anyway. And because of that, I'm going to say the vegetation's significant enough to keep that in place. And the vegetation works as my cap. And we have some fence and signage there. So hopefully that's good enough. But where am I going to document all my lines of reasoning? 2 places. Section K and in my wrap itself. Yep, very good. All right. So we've done our thinking, we've done our delineation, we've done our conceptual model, we've walked through all our lines of evidence. So now we have to do the administrative and pulling together what everybody said earlier. Are your bills paid? Is your FAA in place? Is your LSRP still retained? You need your LSRP. Hasn't been talked about earlier, but DEP looks for your tax records on the Monmouth County tax records, and I know that sounds counterintuitive. If you're in Jersey City, why do you look on Monmouth County? But that's where they look. So if you look on your Monmouth County tax records and you see it's lot 1, block 1 there, but it's 2 and 2 on someplace else, explain to the department why it doesn't match, or which is new, which is right. And of course, we need our legible scaled maps, and we talked about this a little bit earlier too. I feel folks have a tendency to submit their soil wrap and then wait and submit the groundwater wrap. Really think about pulling them together if there's a benefit from having them at the same time, so that the lines of reasoning why soil is okay to keep this in place because groundwater is doing what it's doing, it's M&A or whatever, keep them together. And then SRP related, did you submit your RAR? Do you have your deed notice and institutional controls in place? Got your deed notice? Did you document your deviations? Do you have your multiple lines of evidence? And as we talked, is there overlap there? And again, I'll just call out some oddballs that catch me all the time. The eco shoreline stabilization seems to catch me all the time, and then the PCBs. So make sure you're paying attention to those. Here is, I hope, what will be a good example of a Section K, because I have not submitted my permit yet, but this is what I intend to submit for that earlier example. I say my on-site soils were impacted with historic fill. I did my compliance, I met my standards, therefore I only need my institutional control, and then for my eco, I'm gonna do some inspections. So just write it all out there so that the department understands where you're going with that. All right, I'm gonna breeze through the modifications because you just had Neil talk about modifications and terminations quite well, thank you. And so we have some things to do when you modify and terminate, but here's what I wanna get to. All right, so that was all warm up. Now you're gonna help me with a bigger, a little more complicated site investigation here. I have one property. I have a RAOE for the entire site right here. I have a combination of different caps. I have 3 caps. First parcel, second parcel, and fourth parcel are paved. My third parcel has a very nice gravel cap with demarcation layers. It was beautifully done. But the property's sold and now gonna be split into 4. Going from left to right, I have some PCBs that straddle my property line in the purple. I have an old gas tank field in blue. I have some EPH in yellow, and I have some chlorinated CVOCs in my dark purple circle. And again, historic fill covers the entire thing. Help me out. What are some things I need to do? Tell me something I need to do after I split these apart. Can I keep the same permit? No. How many permits am I getting? 4, 5, 6, I don't know. Let's talk about that. Let's start with the left side. I have my old gas tank. My tanks were pulled 10 years ago. Am I automatically gonna just keep that in place? Julian, what would you do? I don't know. It was 10 years ago I put this cap on it. Let's go resample. Let's see if I can either get some clean samples or maybe I can do a attainment demonstration, kind of make it go away and prove that I don't need it. Let's, for discussion purposes, say I'm able to eliminate my tank farm as an area of concern. What about my PCBs on the top left there? I'm hearing that PCBs are tricky because they might be from off-site. Good point, good point. Maybe I can argue that that's not my PCBs. Do a little bit of research, and in this instance, we did that. We found out there was some PCB impacts from the neighboring property. So what am I gonna do to get rid of that? Call in an off-site number, point the finger in the other direction, and hopefully our neighbor to the left is gonna have to deal with that. So we've gotten rid of the tank farm and the PCBs. Do I still need a permit on that lot? I see some yeses and some confusions. Historic fill, I'm still left with historic fill there. And once it's in the program, my understanding is you gotta keep it there. So a question from the audience. PCBs coming from off-site.
But do you still need to include PCBs or anything that's coming from off-site into your permit?
So the question is, I know the PCBs are not from me. Do I need to put them in my permit? No, it's not my contamination. It's not on my permit. Does it need to be addressed? Yes. The person next door has to do the right thing. There's probably lawsuits and legal wranglings that are going to follow from that, but we'll deal with that as it comes. Okay, so let's move from the first parcel to the second parcel. I have historic fill and EPH. What are my concerns here? Good answer. My audience says my EPH extends onto parcel number 3. So I might need to sample. I might need to delineate. Before, I probably assumed that my EPH is well delineated because I had a much bigger parcel. Excellent. Yes, I need to delineate it. And like we were talking about the PCBs, that's probably going to stick with parcel number 2 with an offsite contribution going to the right. Also, because it's EPH, a little insight into this one, we developed our site-specific standards. We're looking at the 30,000 numbers. We're looking at all those. But we've never found EPH there, even though we've been above numbers. We've done test borings and soil borings and all sorts of things over there. Yes, audience participant? She's actually my PM on this project, so.
There was an EPH. We never found free product.
That's where I was going. Free and residual product. I have to think about that, and we certainly have to look for that in the future, and we'll probably have to write in that if we ever find free or residual product, that we'll deal with it. All right, how about that central property? Gravel cap, historic fill. Do I need a permit? Yeah, just for the historic fill part of it. And then all the way over to the right, I have some chlorinated, some CBOCs. What things do I have to think about there? Delineation again, because again, it was a smaller part of a bigger area. I now have to start thinking about my migration to groundwater cap. Is that sufficient? Do I meet everything there? And am I running way over time? So I'm going to wrap this up and just talk about real quickly in the other direction. If we were to take those 4 properties and combine them, there's probably some efficiencies of scale we can do here. We still have to address now we have 1 owner. We can probably get 1 permit. And I'm going to think about things I can do to make it easier for myself as things are being developed. Can I move historic fill across parcel lines if it's one lot, 1 block, 1 owner, and try and simplify things as I move forward. So, all right, I could have spent another 10 minutes on that one, but I'll go ahead and move along. Thank you for your help, everybody. Good job.
Thank you, Karen. We know those dialogues are certainly helpful, and unfortunately, we don't have limitless time today. But equally as helpful is a really great frequently asked questions with Mark Fisher and Mike Enfanger. So it's another kind of dialogue. And as a reminder, please hold your questions until the end, and we will get to as many as we can with the time that we have left. Thank you.
Any button. So one of the things we did when we were developing the guidance document is, a lot of topics for discussion came up, and more often than not, we would say, that might be a good frequently asked question. So these are some of the things we came up with as we're going through the process. So what we're going to do, I'm going to read the question. Mike's going to read the response, more probably from the department's perspective, and then I'm going to try to provide some additional perspective from a PRCR and LSRP's perspective. So, Mike, how do I develop an engineering control inspection program in my Soulwrap application if my engineering control is not visible or is located beneath a newly redeveloped area?
Well, Mark, the details of the engineering control should be clearly presented in the application. Use section K or refer to the applicable section in the RA report. For example, if a clean soil camp is installed and then the area is filled to raise the elevation, or say it's covered with asphalt parking lot, an inspection program must still be proposed. And then during the biennial certification process, the inspector will not be able to inspect the actual engineering control, but it can still confirm that there's no evidence of disturbance in the restricted area that would potentially reach the depth of the engineering control.
So these types of things do happen, and they happen more often than you might think. What I think is beneficial is to over-explain these types of things. This is a good scenario where you can make a note in section K, but maybe all the details go in the actual RA report. That's the great part about the RA report. You can go into a lot more detail in that document, and you can point the permit application reviewer in section K, where do I look to find this information? That will be really helpful in terms of your review process. The other thing that I'll mention too, just about the RA report that has been mentioned several times today, is that use that document to tell your complete story. I think Kathy mentioned, if you did some attainment compliance work early on in the process in the RI phase and you're submitting your RA report, you should re-explain that, because in the event that the permit reviewer goes in to look at your document, they may see a figure or a table where they see an exceedance and it may not make sense to them. So again, don't forget to revisit history if necessary in your RA report. Next question. Mike, what should I submit first, the remedial action report or the soil remedial action permit application?
Okay, Mark, pursuant to NJC 7:26E-5.7, the RAR and the RAP application should come in together. The RAP application is submitted hard copy through BCANE with a check for the application fee, whereas the RAR comes through the portal.
That is definitely the way they like to see it, and that is, I think, typically what happens. But one of the things you need to keep in mind as a practitioner or an LSRP is that there are a lot of steps that lead up to getting you ready for the permit application. We heard today about getting a deed notice. God forbid you have to have a deed notice in lieu. You need to factor all those things in so you can make the timing work out. In the event where that, for whatever reason, that doesn't happen, it's best to be communicating with the department. I submitted the RA report. My permit's not coming in for another 3 months because whatever reason, I can't get it signed. I'm working on it. It's coming in. It's a good idea to reach out, even if it's just through an email, to reach out to the BRAP group and say, hey, this is out there. It's best to sort of play a little CYA on this type of stuff. I have a post-NFA site which has done no work since the NFA letter. Ooh. Site inspection shows that the cap is unchanged and intact. How do I get the site into compliance?
Okay, first thing you have to do is submit a biennial certification. Okay, if they've done no work, they obviously way behind. So you would submit any inspections that were done to date. Now, if they've done no work, there may not be any. And you submit along with that an application for the soil remedial action permit. Okay, and then you would have to submit the application fee, obviously, but you'd also submit the back annual fees for the permit. For fiscal year 2023, which is coming up pretty soon, July 1st, the fees will be $15.75 as the application fee, and if the back fees will add up now to $34.15. And then you would submit the $3.75 biennial certification fee.
That's a lot of math.
Yeah.
What I would typically do is probably reach out to the department and say, am I doing this right? Because there are a lot of factors in here. And like Mike said, the fees change over time. So this number is not stagnant depending upon when you're coming in with your application. So as an LSRP, when I encounter this situation, usually it's a compliance issue where this comes up and I'm asked to be retained. Usually one of the first things I do is, it's going to take time to sort of pull the pieces together. So I'll, again, reach out to the department and say, hey, I've been retained. I'm retaining myself. It's going to take me 60 more days to get this together, and here's why. So at least they know it's on somebody's radar screen. I've been retained in the LSRP. They know someone's taking care of it. The other thing to keep in mind too is, you're going to probably have to do a little bit of research. With these Soulwrap applications, they want a copy of the RAR. If this was done in the mid-1980s, there may not be such something as an RAR. So you may need to write one, or if you can cobble it together in a way that's easily digested by a permit reviewer, you can submit old documents. But again, you're probably going to want to explain this with a cover letter and try to be as detailed as possible for the situation and why you have the documentation and why the cap, et cetera, is still protective.
Right, and we call that a reconstructed RAR.
Oh, I didn't even know it had a name. So Mike, I can't get the PRCR or the property owner to sign the Soulwrap application. Either they're, God forbid, they're deceased, there's a dissolution of the company doesn't exist anymore. Will the department ever approve a permit without one of these signatures?
Okay, Mark, we'll allow the approval of the RAP without one of the required signatures, either the PRCR or the property owner. The application cover letter and or section K should clearly explain the details and the efforts made to locate the appropriate entity and persons. The Soulwrap guidance contains examples of satisfactory documentation. Okay, did you do certified letters to the entity? For an LLC, you can go to the New Jersey Gateway database, and if they haven't submitted a report or paid the fees for 2 years, we'll consider them dissolved.
So again, I think this is about documentation. Certainly the department doesn't want people taking advantage of this option, meaning there are, as LSRPs, we know there can be very difficult situations when you're at this point trying to get people to sign documents. That's not an excuse that I have a difficult client or a difficult property owner. That you're not going to get a waiver on that. But in certain situations, and we've tried to apply, like Mike said, we tried to provide some examples on how you can document that. They will allow this to happen. One thing that was mentioned earlier, if you have an issue with the property owner not being able to sign the permit, you need a Soulwrap, you're going to need a deed notice. So somebody has to sign the deed notice, and 99.9% of the time it needs to be the property owner. So if for some reason the property owner is refusing to sign because they just don't want a deed notice, that's not going to be an option for you to say, well, I can't get signatures, but here's everything else. What does the department consider to be a, quote, change in engineering control that would require a Soulwrap modification?
Okay, some typical examples include changing from a concrete cap to asphalt cover, full or partial, or from a vegetative cover to a hardscape. A less obvious example might include adding landscape or lighting island to an existing parking lot. Okay, and that's regardless of the size of the new island. Kind of a rule of thumb is if a reasonably observant person will notice that there's a change, then you need a modification.
Yeah, we added this one because I literally had this example come up. We had a site where, we capped historic fill as a Walmart. And, when we did the deed notice, it looked one way. We went out there 2 years later or a year later to do the inspection. We're like, oh no, where did these islands come from? Nobody told us. We had to sort of recreate history with that, but it required a whole process of having to do a permit modification. So keep in mind when that happens, what else do you have to do? You got to terminate your deed notice, go through that process we explained earlier, come in with your permit application with the termination filed and then the new deed notice filed. So keep in mind there's, multiple steps to this process in those types of scenarios. So Mike, if I have a site where DER, a declaration of environmental restriction, or an older deed notice, does that DER or old deed notice need to be replaced with the current model?
Well, it's recommended that you replace these older documents. They're generally of very poor quality. We will consider their use with the application if the site location, contaminants, and engineering control can be identified. But that's a tall order with these old documents.
A lot of times what we find is that these things are really old. Nobody has a good copy of it. And look, if you can't read it, you can't really use it. So it's something to really look at carefully. The other thing is, back in the day when these things first started to happen, the documentation in terms of the attachments, the level of detail is much different. I've seen a deed notice that we've picked up that, basically didn't even have a map in it. It was like, okay, we have a cap on the site and the cap's the parking lot. And that's literally what the deed notice says. And look, those things got approved. So those are the type of things that we should probably try to fix. Oh, it's time for a question.
All right, we have our final poll question for today. Adding an area of landscaping to an existing parking lot would require a soil modification. True or false? So the webinar attendees will have about a minute to answer that. And just a reminder, we will be putting the recording of this presentation and the slides on the SRWMP training page. I can put that link in the chat box for our webinar attendees to see. But yes, in the next coming weeks, this will be available for you to review at your leisure. It looks like most people have answered at this point.
Are we ready for the answer?
Yeah, we give everyone about a minute.
Nail biter, I know.
Yeah.
It's true. We just talked about that. So I have a few more questions. Can I use the water table as a vertical depth for my deed notice Soulwrap application?
Again, no. Actual sample results must be used to establish the vertical delineation of any soil contamination above the applicable soil standards, except for the migration and groundwater standards. And that's regardless of the depth of the groundwater. Extrapolation to achieve the vertical delineation for a deed notice is not acceptable.
And you've heard this topic discussed a lot today in terms of delineation, both horizontal and vertical. And I know that, again, this is something that during the course of our discussion with the department, with the committee, these types of things have come up. People sometimes misunderstand what the objective of delineation is for the purposes of a deed notice, and it's from a protective standpoint. So you could very easily dig below the water table and have, exceedances of a residential or non-residential standard. The department wants to make sure that, the bottom's clearly defined. So I have a very complicated site, like most of us do, with very site-specific issues that's going to be presented in my RAP application. Can I get a technical consultation with the department to get some feedback before I submit my application?
Yes, a technical consultation is available if appropriate, based on the site-specific situation. Okay. There is a technical consultation page on the SRP website to request the technical consultation by email and provide sufficient details regarding the issues to be discussed, including recommendations to the resolution. In some cases, a call or email exchange may be sufficient to resolve the issue. So, we do have a website. You can go there, find the technical consultation person, contact them, and right, it could be just a call or return the email. But if we need to set up a meeting on Teams or whatever, we can do that.
One of the fortunate benefits of COVID is that it sort of forced us to do things more virtually. And I think, at least from my experience, the ability and the timing to get a technical consult pulled together is really improved by doing these things via Teams. And they're, while it doesn't 100% replace an in-person meeting, it is very effective. So the good thing to think about this too is that you can, if we're talking about permits, you can do this, at any phase. You may be in the RI, the beginning of the RA phase, and you've got sort of a complex issue, as we mentioned in the question, that may require multiple people to be at this meeting. So although you may be requesting, Kevin Schick with a soil technical consultation, it requires a permit at the end, and there's some, complex issues. So you can request that someone from the permit group be at that technical consultation, even though you don't have a permit in front of them. It's a good way to get feedback ahead of time, sort of look for those pitfalls and get some feedback from the appropriate folks that'll be looking at your permit application when it ultimately comes in. So Mike, why doesn't the department allow more time, more than 30 days, when it issues its notices of technical deficiency to fix an issue with my application?
Okay, well, the expectation is that no major work or sampling should be needed to address department comments, as it suggests a critical flaw in the submission. However, in some instances, if limited sampling can be completed in 30 days, then this would be acceptable. However, when this can't be accomplished, the application should be withdrawn and corrected and then resubmitted, when it's acceptable. In many instances, the deficiencies can be addressed with additional information, representation of the multiple lines of evidence, to address questions. Yeah, so sometimes you just didn't document your variance or something, and we can accommodate that.
And the department does keep stats on this stuff. I know at some of the outreach sessions, the SRAG meeting and stuff, they'll talk about this type of issue. And more often than not, when these NTDs are issued, ultimately the problems are resolved and the permit gets issued. Very often it's something that can't be fixed. The timing is really the issue. So I think communication is key here. Kathy mentioned it earlier. When you get one of these NTDs, reach out right away. Say, hey, I got this. I'm looking at it. Maybe I need a little bit more time to get back to you. Maybe you want to try to schedule a call with the permit reviewer or the folks that reviewed the permit to try to work through how you're going to resolve this. Look, the 30-day clock is tight. Those of us who do sampling know that requires a bit of a miracle to make that happen. Not an impossibility. And again, I think if you've got a good rapport with your permit reviewer and, hey, I need an extra week to do this, again, more often than not, everybody's, has the same objective here. They want to get these things approved. So I think if you're talking with them, you have a good sort of collegial rapport with your folks at the department, you can get through this process potentially, even if you have to do some additional sampling. But like Mike said, if it's a catastrophic fail, more often, in those scenarios, they're going to probably ask you to withdraw and come back in.
Please don't wait till day 29 on your 30-day clock.
That is an excellent point. Question on presumptive remedy. So my site is subject to the presumptive remedy requirements that we talked about earlier, but I used a modified version of the engineering control. Can I get a Soulwrap in that instance?
Yes, a RAP can be approved, but the department pre-approval of remedial action work plan is required before implementation. This is referred to in the tech regs as an alternate remedy pursuant to 5.3 in the tech regs. This approval comes from Bureau, as the RAP approval should occur before submission of the RAP application and the RAR.
So if you forget to do this, and hopefully as an LSRP you wouldn't forget to do something as important as this, coming in at the permit stage, you're going to probably be in a mess of trouble. They take this stuff pretty serious, but we're talking about these types of sensitive situations. That's why they developed the presumptive remedy guidance. So make sure you are familiar. Go back and read section 5.3. It really explains to you when you need it, what the timing is, and like Mike said, you have to submit a remedial action work plan approval to approve it, even if it's a very minor. I mean, those requirements in the presumptive remedy are pretty specific. So if you're deviating or you're varying even a little bit, you need to come in and get that pre-approved by the department. I think that's all the pre-form questions.
So I have two. The first one is easy. What's the time frame for department to approve soil permit applications?
Oh, I'm not going to answer that.
Yes, the official answer is 120 days, but we're known liars.
Okay, so up to 120 days?
Yes, there is an internal turnaround goal of 120 days.
Mm-hmm. Good. The second one is submitting permit application and remedial action report at the same time. So are you suggesting that we need to, because the tech rule and the permit application kind of requires both. Right. So RIR needs a copy of the permit needs a copy of the RIR.
Right.
A little,
right. Chicken and egg problem.
Yeah, that's how it works now. So are you suggesting that permit application we submit with RIR need to be complete? The deed notice filed, everything is in place. So department will take that application and continue with, review, or would you like us to submit another permit application just separately from the RIR? So department can review only permit application.
Well, no, they should be submitted at approximately the same time.
But
yeah, and they are submitted in different ways.
Okay, so separate.
Right, the remedial action permit application is submitted hard copy with a check.
Right.
Whereas the remedial action report is submitted through the portal.
Right.
Yeah, and not in hard copy.
And the remedial action report will have a copy of soil permit application.
No, that's not really necessary if they're done about the same time.
Well, then we need to look at tech rule because that's what it says.
Right. It is confusing because the ARC rule says submit the application with the RAR. And if you look in the permit section, it says submit a copy of the remedial action report.
Absolutely.
Right. So, which one? Yeah, I'm confused. Just submit them about the same time.
Okay, but separately.
Yeah, they will be done separately, yes.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
I'll say as a matter of practice, I know a lot of LSRPs will include a copy of the application, as an appendix to their report to say, hey, just in case someone's looking for it for completeness, here it is. But to Mike's point, they kind of go in on separate paths, but to the extent possible, they want them kind of submitted concurrently.
Do we have any other questions from the room? All right. We have time for just a couple questions here because we're about at the end of our training. I believe this question is going to be for Karen. So I think this is from your example regarding using vegetation. The question is just, are trees considered an engineering control or is that an institutional control?
I was using that as my engineering control to keep my sediments in place, and it's definitely a discussion with the DEP to make sure that that applies. Right?
Use a dog to keep people.
A dog.
All right, the next question is, in your case example of bringing an old NFA into the permit program, do you have to upload the reconstructed RAR on NJ Online Portal? Or do you have to create a case inventory, and do you have to create a case inventory document?
Okay, the majority of these cases are post no further action letter cases, so you won't be submitting it through the portal. You'll be submitting that hard copy with the application. What was the second part of that?
Case inventory document you need to.
Oh, again, right, and you will not be getting response action outcome. So no, you would not submit a case inventory document.
Okay, thank you. So we're just going to wrap up today. If you did ask a question and it didn't get answered, you will be receiving an email from us in the coming weeks with that answer. Just remember to fill out the SurveyMonkey, and also remember, if you are here in person, that you sign out as well before you leave so you can get your credits. And thank you all so much for coming. Have a good day.